Welcome, villagers, to the village hidden in the stories. I'm your guide, AllKage, the creator and author of all the what-if stories you see on this channel, with your awesome suggestions, of course. I write, edit, and produce every story you hear, so if you're wondering who made it, it's me. I hope you enjoy today's video. Be sure to leave your what-if ideas in the comments and subscribe if you're new. Today's story is What If Naruto Was in MCU, Part 1, starting a new series for you guys. I will work hard on these 6 parts, and I hope you like them. Before we dive in, shout-out time. Thanks so much to everyone who comments, keep them coming. And our second shout-outs for my Shinobi Patreon members. Alpha Wolf 1993, and Dominic. Sorry if the AI butchered your names. If you'd like to support the channel, check out my Patreon, link in the description. For just $5, you can get early access, full text transcripts, thumbnails, art, and even some gaming content. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this what if. Part 1, Shinobi of Mutant Kind. The rain engulfed the small town, its relentless downpour second only to the heavy darkness that cloaked the streets, concealing the weight of its secrets and pain. The storm had been unyielding for hours, made clear by the waterlogged pavement, the scattered mud puddles, and the shallow mist that curled along the ground like a restless spirit. At the town's edge, a school stood quiet and unassuming, its silhouette barely distinguishable in the moonlight. The pale glow offered just enough light to brush against its outline, giving it an eerie, ghost-like presence, hardly noticeable to the untrained eye. Then came the sound of wet footsteps, quiet at first, creeping from the scattered foliage around the building. The noise grew steadily, more deliberate, as a group of figures emerged from the tree-line. Men, dressed in black, skin-tight suits, slipping from the shadows one by one. They paused at the forest's edge, waiting, watching. Their eyes fixed on the school. Some glinted with cold, focused intensity. Others blinked away the dullness of routine, their gazes indifferent. But despite their different states of mind, all were drawn there for the same reason. Amid the silent crowd, a woman stood out. Out of place, yet the quiet air of respect that surrounded her was unmistakable. Her hair was a deep, fiery red, shoulder-length and flowing with a natural, effortless grace. Styled in soft, loose curls, it framed her sharp, observant green eyes made for this kind of work, though her posture suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Her skin was smooth and fair, pale but not sickly, and her frame was wrapped in the same black tactical suit as the men around her. Her face, heart-shaped and deceptively soft, betrayed nothing, but the slight tilt of her head and the idle shift of her weight spoke volumes. She was strong, ready, but undeniably bored. This was Natasha Romanoff, known to some as the Black Widow. A name earned, not given. A name whispered with caution by those who knew of her skill and her cold, efficient way of getting things done. But the way she usually got things done wasn't meant for a mission like this. The redhead stepped away from the edge of the clearing, moving deeper into the small forest where the rest of the team's setup was hidden beneath the cover of branches and rain. Sleek cars sat parked in the mud, their trunks loaded with compact supercomputers, weapons, and crates of gear. Everything had been prepped for this assignment, an assignment Natasha Romanoff hated being part of. This wasn't her style. She was used to working solo, quiet and precise, not bogged down by the weight of a large team. Working like this felt sloppy, forced. And the worst part, the part that irritated her the most, was the nature of the mission itself. Babysitting a school, sitting in the rain for hours, waiting for something, or someone, that no one seemed willing to name. Fury had been deliberately vague, as usual, offering no more than the bare minimum of need to know. It wasn't the first time she'd questioned why she still worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. A part of her wished she'd walked away long ago. But the other part, the part weighed down by old sins and debts she could never repay, knew better. This was the only path forward. The only way she could live with herself. Even if it meant enduring missions like this. Her boots pressed into the wet earth as she crossed to the other side of the camp, stopping at the armory, a plain pickup truck. Modest and unassuming, its bed loaded with weapon crates and supply cases. She pulled one of the smaller cases free, the one she had packed for herself before the mission. When she flipped the lid open, 2 sleek black handguns sat inside, perfectly fitted in their foam casing. Alongside them were her wrist attachments, packed tight with enough ammunition to keep her ready for whatever this so-called babysitting might turn into. Once she secured her gear, sliding the pistols into their holsters and locking the wrist attachments into place, Natasha turned her attention back to the mission. She barely made it a step before another agent appeared in front of her, cutting her off with that casual. Trying too hard smirk plastered across his face. Locked and loaded already, he quipped, hands resting lazily on his belt. You're gonna make the rest of us look bad, Romanoff, or is it just that you were missing me? Her expression didn't shift, no smile, no spark of amusement. Just that same steady, unimpressed stare. Save the flirting, she said flatly, brushing past him. You didn't come over here just to waste breath, talk, mission. The agent sighed, rubbing at the back of his neck, the weight of professionalism finally sinking back into place. His gaze shifted past her, locking onto the school in the distance, his tone lowering to something more fitting. Right, we finally picked up some movement. Subtle, but enough to flag it. Sent a scout team in about 20 minutes ago. His jaw tightened slightly, they haven't come out. Natasha's eyes narrowed, her focus sharpening as she turned toward the school, scanning the dark shape through the rain. Send a small team, she ordered. I'll lead, we'll find out what happened. The agent nodded, already reaching for his comms. Understood, I'll get them moving. Natasha didn't wait for the reply, she was already walking, her mind shifting gears, the usual weight of boredom replaced by something else entirely. A real mission, finally. Her stride was steady and purposeful, yet carried a natural swing, an effortless confidence that tended to draw the eye. Male and female alike, as Natasha approached the school, she didn't bother reaching for a weapon. Whoever had taken out the scout team, if anyone had, wouldn't be expecting company this soon. She planned to use that surprise to her advantage. And if things did turn south, her weapons were right where they needed to be, resting at her hips, only a quick draw away from ending any threat. Reaching the door, Natasha paused. A glance to either side confirmed her backup, the small team she'd requested flanking her in tight formation. One look from her was all it took to silence the air, save for the relentless tap of rain against pavement and rooftops. The world seemed to hold its breath. She raised a hand, signaling the team to move, and stepped forward. The door gave way with a sharp crack as it was kicked open, the other agents flooding in first, weapons raised and sweeping the dim interior. Natasha followed behind at a calm, measured pace, her steps quiet, eyes sharp and cutting through the dark as they adjusted to the stale air of the building. Her stride quickened as the team fanned out, the room cleared in moments with military efficiency. It didn't take long, less than a minute before Natasha spotted the first body, slumped against a wall near the end of the hallway. She crouched beside him, expression unreadable as her gloved hand checked for a pulse. Still alive, his gun lay discarded on the floor, untouched. Blood trickled from his ears, and his breathing was shallow but steady. Whoever hit him hadn't used a weapon. There were no external wounds. His condition, disoriented, unconscious, and bleeding from the ears, suggested something else entirely. Something unnatural. And the bodies kept coming. One by one, the other agents called them in over comms. Each one the same, knocked out, still breathing, no visible injuries that could explain the state they were in. One poor bastard had it worse, his pants were all but gone, the fabric torn, burned, or maybe even dissolved. Natasha wasn't sure. It looked like a mix of all three. And none of it made sense. Her jaw tightened, irritation creeping up her spine as the pieces refused to fit together. Fury, she should have known the man was holding back details. The next time she saw him, she swore, she'd personally castrate him. A soft sound broke through the rain's steady rhythm, the faint scrape of something shifting nearby. Natasha's head snapped toward it, ears tuned to the subtle noise coming from one of the adjacent classrooms. Without a word, she lifted 2 fingers, signaling for 2 agents to flank her. They moved into position, silent and precise, weapons ready. Natasha led the way, her footsteps slow but deliberate as she approached the door. Her hand hovered near her sidearm, just in case, but she didn't draw, not yet. She stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the gloom. A figure stood in the far corner, barely lit by the pale moonlight filtering through the cracked blinds. A kid, no older than a teenager, black hair disheveled, body half hidden in the shadows. His shirt, a simple green, was damp and clung to his frame. He looked terrified. Natasha raised a hand, a silent signal for the agents behind her to lower their weapons. Slowly, their rifles dropped, though their tension didn't. She took a step forward, voice calm but slightly stiff, the way it always was when she had to handle anything outside her usual line of work. "Hey, it's all right. You're safe now." The boy's eyes flicked between her and the others, wide and panicked, his body shaking. And then he opened his mouth. The sound hit them like a freight train, a high-pitched sonic scream that ripped through the room, shattering glass and hurling the agents off their feet. Natasha barely managed to brace herself, sliding back along the floor as her ears rang violently. By the time the sound cut out, the kid was gone, the classroom door still swinging on its broken hinges as the agents scrambled to recover, shaken and disoriented. The kid ran, lungs burning, legs moving on instinct more than control. His soaked sneakers slipped across the wet hallway floors. His head snapping from side to side, desperate for an exit. Another agent rounded the corner ahead of him, weapon raised, but before the man could speak, the boy's mouth opened wide, unleashing another piercing sonic scream. The force hit the agent like a shockwave, slamming him against the wall and crumpling him to the floor in an instant. Without slowing, the kid sprinted past, the sound still vibrating in the air like the echo of a storm. More agents closed in, from stairwells, doorways, corners, but each time the boy lashed out the same way. His screams folded the air, windows cracked, tiles shuddered, and people dropped where they stood, clutching their heads or staggering under the sheer force of it. He moved like a trapped animal. Fast and unthinking, the only clear focus on his face was fear. Not anger, not malice, just fear and panic, raw and unchecked. Natasha wasn't far behind. She emerged from the classroom and tracked his path, the trail of unconscious agents and shattered glass painting a violent, clear route through the building. Her pace quickened, boots hitting the floor hard as her frustration boiled over. Enough was enough. Reaching into her belt, she swapped out her magazine, locking in a fresh load of rubber rounds. The goal wasn't to kill, just stop him. Hard and fast. Up ahead, the boy turned a corner and she closed the gap, raising her weapon and sighting him in. Her finger tensed against the trigger, but just as she was about to fire, another hand clamped firmly around the barrel of her gun, freezing her mid-action. The cold, steady grip wasn't the boy's. The man's grip tightened around her gun, fingers like a steel vise. Slowly, Natasha felt the metal begin to warp, the barrel bending ever so slightly under the pressure. Her eyes flicked from the weapon to the figure in front of her. A man, young, mid-20s at most, standing casually between her and the boy. His presence alone stopped her cold. Even in the dark, she could see him clearly. Blonde hair, wild and spiked, as if gravity barely had a say in its shape. Sharp blue eyes peered at her with an easy, cocky grin, the kind of look that told her he wasn't even breaking a sweat. His black cloak hung loose, sleeves casually rolled up, exposing arms that were solid and well-toned, built for a fight. The rest of his outfit was simple, plain white t-shirt stretched comfortably across his chest, black baggy pants tucked into all-black sneakers. He could have passed for an agent if it wasn't for the sheer confidence radiating off him. But what stood out most were the 3 faint, whisker-like birthmarks etched across each cheek. The marks gave him an odd, almost animalistic allure, one that rubbed Natasha the wrong way. Her jaw tightened. This was wasting time. Without hesitation, she reached for her second handgun, drawing and aiming in one fluid motion. But before she could squeeze the trigger, the blonde moved. A sharp slap knocked the weapon clean from her grasp, the force stinging her wrist. Before the pain even fully registered, his leg snapped up, driving a swift, brutal kick square into her stomach. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, sending her stumbling backward, doubling over as her boots skidded across the wet floor. The man never lost that damn grin. She barely had a chance to shift before another sharp kick slammed into her side, sending her crashing into the wall hard enough to crack the concrete. Pain radiated through her ribs, white-hot and suffocating, leaving her slumped against the fractured wall. Her breath coming in shallow bursts. Natasha had handled pain before, broken bones, gunshots, worse. But these strikes were different, sharp, precise, and devastatingly fast. Her body simply wouldn't respond, muscles refusing to move, as if the fight had been kicked right out of her. The man didn't follow up. He just stood there, grin widening, like he was enjoying the sight of her struggling to lift her head. That cocky, mocking expression was enough to make her blood boil through the haze of pain. Wow, wasn't expecting to step in this soon. You agents are sharp. Not sure why you're here though, he mused, his voice light and easy, like they were discussing the weather. Natasha's glare sharpened, even as her vision wavered. Was he seriously making small talk, after flooring her with 2 hits? The blonde glanced briefly over his shoulder at the boy, then back at her. His grin didn't fade, but it shifted, a subtle edge creeping into it, darker now, as he began to close the distance between them. Instinct took over, gritting her teeth against the pain. Natasha forced herself upright, discarding her warped handgun and drawing the second. She fired, once, twice, a controlled burst. But the man moved like nothing human. Each shot missed by a sliver, his body weaving through the line of fire with infuriating ease. The bullets forced him back. Though, the grin flattening into a sharp, knowing smirk. "Damn, still got some fight in you," he said, voice calm but edged with something almost amused. "Your aim could use work, though, not that it'd help. Close or far, nobody can shoot me." The arrogance in his voice wasn't new to her. Natasha had met more than her share of cocky men, but something about this one grated differently, like every word was designed to crawl under her skin. "Well, I can't play with you kids all night," he added, glancing back at the teen, who now stood calmly behind him, visibly more at ease with the man's arrival. "I've got to get this kid out of here." So they knew each other. That much was clear. But Natasha wasn't about to let either of them walk away. Gritting through the pain, she pushed off the wall and surged forward, her focus locked onto the blonde as she closed the distance, preparing to strike. Natasha didn't hesitate. The moment she closed the gap, she launched her attack, driving a sharp punch straight for his throat. But the blonde man only tilted his head, letting her fist pass by as if he had all the time in the world. His movements were infuriatingly relaxed, not sloppy, just playful. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he quipped, dancing out of range with that same cocky grin glued to his face. But if this is all S.H.I.E.L.D. has, I'm starting to feel a little disappointed. Natasha lunged again, this time feinting high and swinging low, trying to sweep his legs out. He stepped over it with ease, hands still lazily tucked in his pockets. Come on, he teased, circling her. At least make me break a sweat. Her patience snapped. Shut up, she hissed, drawing her gun in one fluid motion and firing point blank. The blonde's grin didn't even flicker. His hand moved faster than her eyes could follow, fingers closing around the barrel before she could squeeze the trigger again. The metal groaned under the strength of his grip, bending as if it were nothing more than soft clay. A sharp twist, and the weapon was wrenched from her grasp and flung across the room, skittering into the darkness. Fine, hand to hand, then. Natasha closed the distance, her strikes becoming a blur, sharp, calculated, every move meant to cripple or kill. She targeted joints, soft tissue, pressure points. Any other opponent would have already dropped. But not him. He parried each blow with the same irritating ease, moving like a man playing a game rather than fighting for real. Natasha baited him into a strike, a strong left hook, and caught his arm mid-swing, twisting her body and locking her legs around his neck in one swift motion. Using her momentum, she aimed to throw him off balance and bring him crashing to the floor. But his footing never wavered. Instead, she felt his muscles tense under her grip, holding her up as if her entire body weight was nothing. Now, he drawled, voice dripping with amusement. A beautiful woman like you really shouldn't go wrapping your legs around just anyone, people might get the wrong idea. Her blood boiled, anger lit a fresh fire under her aching muscles, but before she could counter, he lifted her with ease and flung her off him like a discarded coat. She hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, the force rattling through her already battered frame. Don't take it personally, he added, casually brushing imaginary dust off his shoulder. You're better than the rest of your little squad. But against me, doesn't count for much. Before she could rise, he was already on her, striking with blinding speed. Another hit, and she staggered backward, boots sliding against the wet floor as she barely managed to stay upright. He advanced, unhurried, readying for the final blow. But Natasha straightened, locking her jaw, defiant. You're not leaving with that kid, she spat, steadying herself. I'll take both of you in. For the first time, his grin wavered, just a little. He glanced over his shoulder at the teen, who watched from behind, wide-eyed but calm. Then his gaze returned to her, sharp and resolute. The playful edge in his voice vanished. Someone like me can't allow that. His tone dropped lower, colder. Just who the hell do you think I am? Before she could answer, his leg shot forward in one clean, powerful motion, slamming into her midsection. The sheer force sent her crashing back through debris, her body sliding across the cracked floor, gasping for air as the world spun. When the ringing in her ears dulled, she forced herself upright, lungs burning, but the hallway stood empty. The boy and the blonde were gone. The silence was deafening. Natasha staggered to her feet, wiping a thin line of blood from the corner of her mouth, her breath steadying despite the sharp ache in her ribs. The rain still hammered against the shattered windows. But the storm inside her was far worse. They were gone. Her fingers clenched into tight fists, her mind already running through every scenario, every angle, every bit of missing information, all of it leading to the same conclusion. Fury had sent her and an entire team into this blind. Deliberately. She let out a dry, humorless laugh under her breath. Of course he did, classic Fury, always holding his cards until the last second, even if it meant his own agents paid the price. When she got back, she was going to have a very direct conversation with him. One that involved less talking and more breaking his desk in half. Maybe his nose too, if she was feeling generous. Her muscles screamed as she moved, her body sore and bruised. But her thoughts were sharp and clear. First thing she'd ask him, who the hell were they? Not just the kid, the boy was scared, confused, sure, but that man. That man was something else entirely. And Fury had known. She grit her teeth, her jaw tightening, knowing the answer before she even reached the question. He always knew. This wasn't just another observe and babysit job. It was something bigger, something he hadn't trusted her, or anyone, to handle fully. But the next time she was sent on a mission like this, she'd make damn sure she wasn't walking in blind, not again. Not ever. Her eyes drifted toward the school's wrecked hallway one last time, the imprint of the fight still burned into the cracked walls. Before turning on her heel. Time to go have a little chat with the director. The rain still poured, relentless as ever, washing over the cracked pavement and the bodies of unconscious agents. Flashlights cut through the mist, beams swaying across the courtyard as the recovery team moved in, checking vitals and securing the perimeter. One of the agents radioed in confirmation. All accounted for, the targets are gone. Somewhere above, far from the mud and soaked concrete, Nick Fury stood in front of a wide monitor, arms crossed, watching the live satellite feed of the school's empty rooftop. His expression was unreadable, but the tightening of his jaw said enough. The soft hiss of automatic doors pulled his attention as Natasha walked into the room. Still in her field gear, rainwater trailing behind her. She didn't speak, she didn't need to, Fury simply raised an eyebrow. Want to tell me what the hell happened out there? Natasha stayed quiet for a moment, her gaze flicking to the monitor, then back to Fury. Her face was blank, but the tension in her shoulders gave her away. Wasn't exactly the clean sweep you were hoping for, she answered dryly, peeling off her damp gloves. We weren't outclassed, we were outmatched. Fury's eye narrowed slightly, the faintest sign of concern slipping through. Outmatched by who? A kid, and someone else. Natasha's voice tightened, a man, fast, strong, smart enough to toy with us. And judging by the way he handled me, this wasn't his first time running circles around a SHIELD team. Fury said nothing, his silence heavier than most conversations. You sent us in blind, she added, stepping closer, her tone low but sharp. That wasn't a standard mutant case, you knew that. Fury's jaw worked slightly, then he turned back toward the monitor, as if the empty rooftop still held all the answers. There are things above your pay grade, Romanoff. She huffed, somewhere between bitter amusement and pure frustration. Yeah, well, next time maybe tell me before I get thrown through a wall. Fury finally glanced at her, the weight of command and secrets written all over his face. Noted. The silence stretched for a moment before Fury turned, walking over to the desk. He placed a folder down, flipping it open. Inside were scattered files, photos, satellite images, all redacted beyond usefulness. Get some rest, he said without looking at her. We're not done with this. Natasha arched an eyebrow, her patience thinning. So, what, you expect me to just ignore the part where you've been keeping the truth under wraps? Fury's eye flicked up at her, the faintest twitch at the corner, like the word had almost caught him off guard, almost. But Natasha knew better, Fury didn't do surprised. That man is still out there, she pressed, her voice cold and steady. Probably out rounding up more mutants as we speak, and you want me to clock out and get some rest? Fury let out a slow exhale, his expression flattening. I hate when you get like this, he muttered, more annoyed than defensive, as if the conversation was a familiar one, and one he'd rather not be having. Fury turned back to the monitors, his arms crossing again. You've done your part, Romanoff, this one isn't your fight. Natasha's jaw tensed. Funny, I didn't realize you were the one deciding that. Fury let out a dry, humorless chuckle. I'm always the one deciding that. She stepped closer, folding her arms. You saw him, didn't you? The blonde, strong, fast, cocky, he's not some street-level thug. You don't want me chasing him because you already know who he is. His silence was answer enough. You can tell me to stand down all you want, but you and I both know I'm not just going to sit back while someone like that walks around unchecked. That's the problem, Fury said, turning slightly, his tone low and firm. You won't let it go. Which is why I'm making it easier for you, effective immediately, you're on paid leave. Natasha blinked, her jaw tightening further. You're benching me. Already done. She held his stare a moment longer, sharp and cold, before finally scoffing and turning on her heel. Fine, enjoy the mess without me. The hiss of the door echoed behind her as she left. Boots trailing water along the tile until the room fell silent again. Fury stood still, the faint glow of the monitors washing over his face, his hands resting behind his back. For a while, the only sound was the soft hum of electronics. Then, you handled that well, a voice mused casually from the shadows. Fury didn't flinch, didn't turn, took you long enough. Out from the dark, the blonde stepped forward, that same cocky grin tugging at his mouth. I was giving you privacy, looked like a personal moment. Well, it wasn't, Fury shot back, more annoyed than before. His one good eye settled on the blonde standing casually across the room, watching him a little too closely. For a moment, just a flicker, Fury could have sworn the kid's eyes shifted to purple. Must have imagined it. Or maybe not. Why are you here, Naruto? I thought we agreed, no sneaking up on me with your shinobi tricks while I'm working. That earned a low chuckle from the blonde, didn't look like work to me, sounded more like arguing. About me, no less. Naruto drifted toward the other side of the room, stopping in front of an old wooden chair, out of place, scarred with claw marks and a splintered leg. Before he could touch it, Fury's gun was already leveled at him. Naruto glanced back, rolling his eyes, then stepped away from the chair. You know those don't work on me. Fury didn't flinch, lowering the weapon. Doesn't mean I won't try. Naruto moved toward the desk, his earlier amusement thinning into something closer to irritation. Without a word, he tossed a folder onto the desk. Fury's brow arched as he flipped it open. Aside from you bending the rules of our deal more than a few times, which we'll talk about later, we've got a new problem. There's been talk about some rogue mutants grouping up for something. Fury scanned the photos, some faces looked human enough, but others were unmistakably mutated, jagged features, pale eyes, bodies twisted by their genes. Big names too, Naruto added, Sabretooth, Magneto, even Juggernaut. They're moving in packs, scouting, planning something, all around the world. Fury snapped the folder shut, his frown deepening. And what does that have to do with S.H.I.E.L.D.? Our deal was simple, we leave you and your little island alone, and you stop hauling in mutants like a stray dog shelter. Naruto's grin twitched into a thin, sharp smile. Yeah, that was the deal, but here's the thing, you broke it. 3 times, actually, including tonight. He tapped the folder, voice cooling. You're lucky that new kid didn't kill your agents. Some of them are deaf now, sure, but it could have been a lot worse. Fury didn't blink, though the tension in the room shifted. Both knew the truth, S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't entirely his leash to hold. The higher-ups played their own games, digging into things they didn't understand. If they wanted to piss off a man with a private mutant refuge and the power to wipe out half the globe, so be it. Fury didn't have to like it, but he did have to clean up the mess. Fury let the silence stretch for a moment, fingers tapping once on the folder before glancing back up. His voice was flat, but edged with suspicion. "So I'll ask again, what do you want, Naruto?" Naruto leaned back slightly, eyes flicking away toward the darkened window, the distant hum of rain tapping against the glass. When he finally spoke, the usual cocky sharpness in his voice had softened. "I want help, simple as that." He paused, then added, "The ones grouping up, they are doing it for a reason, and it's much better for us to figure out why they are gathering instead of just standing around." Fury tilted his head slightly, waiting. "My island was meant to give mutants a home, a future away from all this crap. I want mutants and humans to coexist. You and your higher-ups want to keep them hidden, shoved under the rug where no one sees them." Naruto's gaze returned to Fury, sharp now, but a mutant like Magneto wants mutants to overthrow humans, and I'm sure you know that. Someone like him putting forces together could be bad for everyone. Fury exhaled through his nose, leaning back against his desk. Arms folded. "You know the brass would never greenlight this," he muttered. "Even if I wanted to help, investigate, they'd be breathing down my neck, asking questions I don't feel like answering." Naruto snorted, "Won't matter much if they are gone, right?" That earned a sharp glance from Fury, and for a few beats they stood locked in a quiet, unspoken back and forth. Naruto broke it first, shifting his weight, "I'm not asking for your whole damn agency. Just one agent, one person with enough clearance to get me what I need." Fury stayed silent for a long moment, then finally muttered, "If you're serious about this, we make a new deal." Naruto's brow quirked, "I'm listening, what are your terms?" Fury moved to the side of his desk, reaching for another folder, this one thinner, but marked with a shield seal. "You've felt it, haven't you, the world shifting?" He thumbed through the pages as he spoke, banners still off the grid. Stark, after nearly getting killed, decided to stop selling weapons and started playing hero in a tin can. Captain America's still trying to figure out what century he woke up in. Fury's gaze lifted, locking on Naruto's. "And then there's the hammer, landed in New Mexico. Mythological carvings, hasn't moved an inch since it hit, not a soul can lift it." Naruto smirked, "I could probably lift it." Fury let out a quiet, tired grunt, "Yeah, you probably could. That's not the point." Naruto's smile faded, "Then what is?" Fury's voice lowered, "Something's coming, bigger than anything you've dealt with, bigger than anything I've seen. And when it hits, not even you might be enough to stop it." That made Naruto pause. His expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, memory, or regret, it wasn't clear. Fury straightened up, "When that time comes, I want you in on a project. We want to assemble these people as something different. Until then, once this little battle of yours is over, you work with S.H.I.E.L.D. a little. Enough to keep the higher-ups off my back." Naruto narrowed his eyes, studying the older man. Fury didn't flinch, didn't blink. "Not like they can tell you what to do anyway," Fury added. "I know you, you're not the leash type, this doesn't change that." Naruto sighed, arms folding across his chest, then after a beat looked back at him. "Fine," he said, "but I'm adding a condition of my own." Fury raised an eyebrow, "Let's hear it." "I want full jurisdiction on any mutants you pick up. You bring them to me first, my island gives them a shot at life before your people lock them away." Fury let the words hang there, the weight of it clear, before nodding once. "I'll see what I can do." Naruto gave a small, satisfied smile, "I'll take that as a yes." And just like that, the blonde vanished into thin air, leaving only his voice behind. "Just send them to my island in about a week, I got something to do, see ya some other time, Mr. Eyepatch." Fury stood there in the quiet, staring at the spot where Naruto had stood, and muttered under his breath, damn kids. The room was silent again. Fury stood alone, staring at the empty space where Naruto had vanished, the weight of their conversation settling heavier than he cared to admit. The blonde reappeared on top of a mountain, standing against the endless stretch of white. His usual grin softened into a small, thoughtful smile as he readjusted his coat, tugging his sleeves down to guard against the cold bite of the wind. The air stung sharp against his nose, the kind of cold that crept into your bones if you stood still too long. He didn't mind it much, not today. His boots crunched against the snow as he started down the ridge, eyes landing on a quiet village nestled below the slope. Another stray. That's all this was supposed to be. Another young mutant scared out of their mind, too dangerous to stay, too hunted to run. His island had space, it always did. And saving one more before the world swallowed them up felt like enough of a reason to keep moving. But lately, the timing wasn't sitting right. Too many of them, too clustered, too connected. And now this mutant. One more before the real work starts. Naruto thought, his gaze narrowing as he stepped off the last ridge, snow breaking under his boots. The village lay quiet below, but something about the stillness gnawed at him. Adjusting his collar, Naruto let his senses drift outward, stretching for anything unusual. The mission was simple on paper. But nothing about this world had been simple since the day he arrived. He exhaled through his nose, pushing the creeping memories to the back of his mind. They wouldn't do him any good right now. Instead, he let his usual grin tug back at the corner of his mouth as he stepped into the village. Snow blanketed everything in sight, from the worn dirt paths to the crooked rooftops. Judging by the fresh, heavy layer, it hadn't been long since the last snowfall. The place felt untouched by time. Primitive, no signs of modern tech, not even the luxury of a cooler, though in weather like this, it wasn't as if they needed one. Naruto's gaze flicked from building to building as he wandered deeper into the village, his sharp blue eyes subtly shifting to violet, the telltale glow of his Renni Sharingan. An ability still new, still settling, but sharp enough to spot even the most well-hidden signatures. And yet, nothing. Not the mutants, not even a trace. His brow twitched as a quiet grumble rumbled in his throat. Looks like this was going to be more trouble than he'd hoped. The crunch of snow under his boots was soon buried under the soft murmur of voices. Chatter drifted through the narrow streets, but there was no mistaking the sudden shift in tone, whispers, scattered but growing, eyes trailing his every step. Naruto blinked, letting his eyes shift back to normal. It was only then that he noticed just how many stares were fixed on him. Sharp, cautious, unblinking. Great, outsider syndrome, classic. He hoped the mutant would show soon. The longer the silence stretched, the more suffocating the attention felt, and he hadn't even been here a full minute. Minutes ticked by, and his patience thinned. Whether it was boredom or rising annoyance. It didn't matter. Both left the same bitter taste in his mouth. The stares only grew worse, until the entire village seemed to shift its gaze in his direction, like an unspoken signal had passed between them. The sensation crawled under his skin, uncomfortably familiar, like an echo from his childhood back in the Leaf Village. But that was then. And this wasn't worth caring about. What bothered him more was the stone wall he kept hitting. No one spoke to him. Not even a word. And it wasn't the language, he'd learned every one this world had to offer, even the forgotten ones. No, this was something else, avoidance, fear, or maybe something worse. His thoughts were just starting to spiral deeper when a voice cut through the cold. "You're not from around here, are you?" Naruto turned, his eyes landing on a man and a woman standing a few feet away. Both were bundled in thick coats, snow clinging to their boots. The man's face was lined with age, but his posture was steady, guarded. The woman looked younger, sharp-eyed, but cautious. The man spoke again, stepping forward just enough to let Naruto know he wasn't entirely afraid, just smart enough to stay on edge. "Name's Ilya," the man said, voice low but clear. "This is Lena." The woman gave a nod, studying him more carefully. Naruto's grin returned, smaller this time. "Naruto." Ilya raised an eyebrow at the name, but didn't push it. "We don't get many visitors out here. Actually, we don't get any." His gaze lingered on Naruto's coat, the light dusting of snow on his hair. "You lost?" Naruto thought about lying, but the weight in the man's voice suggested he wouldn't buy it. So he settled for something in between. "Looking for someone," he answered simply. Lena glanced at Ilya, her lips pressing into a thin line before she spoke. "You won't have much luck wandering like that. Come inside, before the cold finishes the job." Naruto tilted his head slightly, studying their faces. The tension in the air hadn't vanished, but it shifted, less hostile, more curious. Maybe even concerned. After a moment, he nodded, "Lead the way." Without another word. The pair turned, guiding him through the narrow street toward a small, worn-down house tucked between two crooked buildings. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, the only sign of warmth in the village so far. As they reached the door, Ilya pushed it open, stepping aside so Naruto could enter first. "Whatever you're looking for," Ilya said as Naruto stepped inside, "you might have found something else instead." Naruto paused, glancing back at him. Something about the way he'd said it didn't sit right. And for the first time since he arrived, Naruto started to wonder if the kid wasn't the only reason this place felt so off. The house was small, but warm. The kind of warmth that came from real wood and lived in space. Not polished walls or modern heating systems. Naruto settled into a worn chair near the fireplace, his coat draped loosely around him while Lena and Ilya took seats across from him. The old man offered him a mug of something that smelled like bitter herbs and smoke. Naruto accepted it, more out of politeness than thirst. "So," Ilya started, leaning back slightly, "who exactly are you looking for out here, stranger? Can't say we get lost family members turning up." Naruto tilted his head, keeping his expression neutral, light, just another wanderer passing through. "Old friend," he lied smoothly, letting the words roll off his tongue like they'd always been true. "We got separated a while back. And I heard a rumor they might have come through a place like this." Lena arched a brow, unconvinced but polite enough not to press. "No names?" Naruto gave the faintest smile. "Doesn't help much when the name's fake, now does it?" The lie sat in the air for a moment, heavy enough for them to know he wasn't going to give them anything more, but light enough that the conversation shifted, away from suspicion and more toward curiosity. Small talk filled the space after that. The weather, the way supplies were running low, how the snow had come earlier than expected this year. But before Ilya could launch into another story about the mountains, the sound of a door creaked open from the hallway. Small, quick footsteps padded into the room. A boy. Maybe 10, with messy black hair sticking out at odd angles and graphite stains on his fingers, stood there holding a thin stack of stapled papers. His eyes lit up when he saw the two adults. "I finished the new one," the boy announced proudly, waving the papers in his hand. "You gotta read it, it's way better than the last one." Naruto blinked, surprised for the first time since stepping foot in the village. His gaze softened slightly, watching the kid march forward with an unshakable confidence only children could manage. Ilya chuckled, motioning the boy over. "Slow down, Anton, let us catch our breath, yeah?" Anton plopped himself onto the arm of his father's chair, eyes flicking toward Naruto. "Who's that?" Naruto met the boy's gaze and offered a small smile, "Just passing through." Anton studied him for a second longer, then looked back to his parents. "You think he likes comics?" Lina gave the boy a playful tap on the shoulder. Maybe let him warm up before you start pitching your work, artist. Naruto let out a quiet chuckle, settling back in the chair, though the thought lingered in his mind. Could he be the mutant? No, there were a lot of weird characters in this place, he shouldn't just suspect the only child. The room settled again, the boy still flipping through his little comic, occasionally glancing up at Naruto with the sharp curiosity only kids seem to have. Lina's voice cut back in, soft but edged with genuine interest. So, this, old friend, you're looking for. I take it wandering through frozen mountains isn't exactly your hobby. What is it you do, exactly? Naruto leaned back in his chair, one arm lazily draped over the side. That same easy, cocky grin tugged at the corner of his mouth, the kind that could disarm a room but never quite gave away the full story. Freelance contractor, he answered, tapping a finger against his mug. Odd jobs, sometimes security, sometimes recovery work, I go where I'm needed. There was enough truth in it to roll off his tongue without hesitation, after all, finding lost mutants, dealing with trouble. And keeping peace where others couldn't, that was all part of the job, wasn't it? Ilya raised a brow. Freelance, in a place like this? He let out a dry laugh. That's a long way to go for odd jobs. Naruto just shrugged, the grin never fading. Sometimes the paycheck's worth the hike, sometimes it's not about the money at all. Lina gave him a look, that kind of knowing glance, as if she could see the dodge for what it was, but respected the walls he'd put up. Sounds like you've got more stories than you let on. Before Naruto could respond, Anton chimed in, waving his comic like a sword. Do you have to fight people? The boy asked, eyes wide and eager. Like in real fights? Cool ones? Naruto's grin shifted, not cocky this time, but thoughtful, almost distant for a second. He met the kid's gaze and nodded once. Yeah, he said simply. More times than I can count. Anton lit up, practically bouncing in place. Were you scared? Naruto tilted his head, pretending to weigh the answer, though the truth was already there. Sometimes, being scared just means you've got something worth protecting. His eyes flicked to Ilya and Lina for the briefest moment, the meaning layered beneath the words. And when that happens, you fight a little harder. Anton didn't really catch the weight behind the answer, too busy imagining some over-the-top hero fight in his mind. But the adults exchanged a subtle glance. Naruto leaned forward slightly, eyes flicking toward the window, his senses brushing outward again. Anton, wide-eyed and brimming with curiosity, didn't let up. The boy leaned forward on his elbows, comic book forgotten for the moment, too caught up in the excitement of having a stranger who wasn't just another villager, sitting across the table. So, like, when you fight people, do you win every time? Anton asked, swinging his legs beneath the chair, his small voice somewhere between impressed and hopeful. Naruto let out a short chuckle, resting his chin lazily on the back of his hand. Most of the time, he answered. Chuckling at the thought of losing now, but they didn't need to know that. But the thing about fights is, it's not about always winning, he still knew that for a fact. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away, or when to outsmart the other guy before the first punch gets thrown. Anton scrunched his face, clearly not as impressed with the idea of avoiding a fight as he was with the idea of throwing fists. But you're strong, right? Strong enough to win against anyone? Naruto leaned back slightly, gaze flicking toward the quiet crackling of the fireplace before returning to the boy. That same relaxed, cocky smile curled at his lips. Strong enough for the important stuff. His answer hung in the air for a moment, and the kid nodded, but Naruto's sharp instincts began to stir, just the faintest twinge at the edge of his thoughts. At first, it was easy to ignore, a small pull, like the echo of a breeze you couldn't quite feel on your skin, but knew was there. Naruto kept the conversation moving, masking his shift in attention as Anton fired off another question. So you travel everywhere, alone, the boy pressed, the excitement still there, but something else now, tucked underneath his voice, like the tone had dipped half a note lower. Alone, most of the time, Naruto kept his tone light, smooth. But I got people I check in on, even a few old friends that get in the way sometimes. His eyes narrowed slightly, as the tug in his mind grew more deliberate, less of a soft push and more like, prodding, testing. Not Kurama, that much he was sure of. Kurama's presence had been, deeper, more commanding, an old weight in the back of his head. This wasn't that, this was subtle, foreign. Naruto's gaze shifted for the smallest second toward Anton, watching the boy's fingers drum against the wooden table, the same rhythm, over and over, steady and measured. His posture had straightened a little, almost too still for a kid who'd just been practically bouncing minutes ago. Ilya's voice pulled Naruto's attention back to the room. "It's rare we see anyone this far out," he said casually, sipping from his mug. "Especially someone who isn't dressed like they belong in the cold." His smile was kind enough, but there was the faintest thread of curiosity, almost like the couple had more questions than their polite faces let on. Naruto sat back, lacing his fingers together on the table. The tug in his mind hadn't stopped, in fact, it felt like it was mapping him, the same way he'd mapped chakra signatures back home. But this wasn't chakra. Not entirely. "Let's just say I've had worse winters," Naruto answered, letting his confidence soak through the cracks in the conversation, using it like a mask. "And I'm used to strange places, sort of makes the world feel a little smaller when you've seen too much of it." The moment hung quiet again, save for the occasional pop from the fire. His eyes drifted back toward Anton. The kid had stopped drumming his fingers, hands now folded neatly in his lap, posture perfect, too perfect, and his gaze, while still locked onto Naruto, seemed distant, like his mind wasn't fully seated in the room anymore. That was when Naruto knew. The prodding wasn't random. Someone, or something, was listening. Whether it was the boy or someone else, he couldn't tell yet, but the shift in the kid's demeanor was too sharp, too practiced. Naruto leaned forward slightly, the smile still on his face but his eyes sharp beneath it, scanning the kid in a way only someone like him could. "So, Anton," he started, tone smooth as ever, "what's your comic about?" The boy blinked, his expression flickering for just a heartbeat, the barest crack in the mask, before the usual childlike enthusiasm returned, like it had been flipped on by a switch. "It's about heroes, ones who don't wear capes." Naruto nodded slowly, the weight of the answer sitting differently in his head now. There was more going on here than some random kid with an overactive imagination. And Naruto intended to find out exactly what. Naruto let the conversation drift, easing his focus off Anton for the moment, though the boy's odd shift hadn't left the back of his mind. He let his posture relax again. Turning his attention back toward Ilya and Anya, letting the easy smile slip back onto his face. "Well," he exhaled, stretching his arms out with a mock yawn, "looks like I might have wasted a trip. The person I was tracking probably moved on, or the info I got was just plain wrong." He let out a light chuckle, brushing snowflakes from his coat sleeve, "Happens more than you'd think." But the reaction he got wasn't what he expected. Both Ilya and Lena shifted almost immediately, their calm politeness giving way to something else, worry, almost too quickly. "You're leaving, already?" Lena asked, her voice catching just slightly as she leaned forward. "The weather's only going to get worse, you know. Travelers don't usually last long out there this time of year." Naruto raised an eyebrow slightly, catching the faint tightness in her voice. Ilya mirrored her concern, his hands folding on the table as he added, "Besides, there aren't many visitors that make it this far up. You might as well stay a few days, rest, the roads will be easier later in the week." Their insistence felt off, too eager, too practiced. It wasn't that they were being unfriendly, it was the opposite. It felt almost as if they wanted to control his next move. Naruto's easygoing grin didn't waver, but his mind sharpened. They were either hiding something, or protecting someone, maybe both. His eyes drifted back to Anton, who had gone back to flipping through his comic book. Humming softly under his breath, like nothing at all had happened. Like there hadn't been that subtle, unnatural shift just minutes ago. And that's when it clicked. The mutant he'd come searching for was here, somewhere in this quiet, snowy village. And a few more days would give him time to figure out exactly who, and why the locals were bending over backwards to keep him around. Naruto leaned back in his chair and gave a small, slow nod, as if weighing his options. Then he let out a half-laugh. "Well," he said, scratching the back of his head, "I guess a few more days couldn't hurt." Anya's expression softened just enough, and Ilya offered a relieved smile. Naruto, meanwhile, let his gaze wander back to the window, watching the snow fall beyond the glass, and let his mind shift from traveler to tracker. He'd play along, for now. But whatever was happening here, it was only just starting. That night, when Naruto finally lay down to sleep, his body rested, but his mind did not. Most of his night was spent tucked away inside his own mindscape, a place that, even now, felt oddly crowded for reasons he couldn't quite put his finger on. Still, there were corners of it, quiet, steady places, where he could remain aware, where instinct and experience kept him half awake and listening for the world outside. And it was a good thing. 2. Every so often, even in that half-dreaming state, he felt it. The faint, unmistakable presence of Anton. Not physically nearby, but brushing against his senses all the same, and always followed by the same light, prodding pressure in the back of his mind. The same sensation he'd noticed back at the table. It wasn't aggressive. Not like Kurama had been, long ago. It wasn't even particularly skilled. But it was there, persistent and curious, like a hand testing a locked door, over and over again. The more it happened, the more certain Naruto became. The kid wasn't normal. And chances were, he was exactly who Naruto had come looking for. Morning came cold and early, with pale sunlight cutting through the frosted glass of the house. Naruto moved like nothing had happened, stretching the stiffness from his limbs and forcing himself into the day's rhythm. If there was one thing he knew how to do, it was blend in. He spent the morning helping the villagers gather materials, mostly wood, hauling logs through the snow, working alongside the locals as if he'd been part of the community for years. No one questioned it much, and Naruto, with his usual confidence and ease, offered little reason to. By the afternoon, he shifted to hunting, ranging out into the wilds beyond the village. His aim wasn't to stockpile, only enough to help the smaller families keep their tables full. The whole day passed like that, honest work. Easy smiles, but underneath it all, his focus stayed sharp. That was actually the routine he fell into. For the first few days, he helped the village in any way he could, gaining some praise, and less stares. However, he did always find one person watching sometimes, at least once a day. All of this continued, about 4 days at the least. On the 5th, Naruto found himself resting, and later that night, eating a well-put-together dinner by Lina. Night had settled heavy over the village, and the warmth inside Ilya and Lina's small home was a welcome contrast to the biting cold outside. Naruto sat casually in one of the old wooden chairs near the table, a simple slice of dried meat resting between his fingers. Taking slow bites as the conversation carried on around him. Ilya leaned back in his seat, arms crossed loosely, a faint smile sitting on his worn face. "You've done more for the village in one day than some do in a season," he said with quiet appreciation. "If you ever get tired of wandering, you'd be welcome to stay." Naruto gave a light chuckle, brushing a bit of crumb from his coat. I'd probably start slacking off if I stuck around too long, besides, I'm not much for settling. His voice was as light and easy as ever, that same outward confidence stitched into every word. Lena added softly, "Still, we appreciate the help, you've taken a lot off everyone's shoulders. It's rare these days to meet someone who does something without expecting anything back." Naruto shrugged, the faintest twitch of amusement flickering across his face. "It's just work, my body's built for it, so it'd be a waste not to." As the conversation floated between small stories and quiet thanks, Naruto kept his tone relaxed, but his mind stayed sharp. That feeling had returned, the quiet prodding against the edges of his thoughts, soft, curious, but clear. It was more deliberate this time, almost testing his boundaries. He let it linger for a moment, just long enough to confirm it wasn't his imagination, before pushing back with the faintest brush of his own will. Not aggressive, just a sharp mental nudge, the equivalent of swatting away an annoying fly. Across the room, Anton, who'd been quietly flipping through a worn notebook on the floor near the fire, froze for half a second. His head didn't lift, but Naruto caught the subtle shift in his posture. The boy stiffened, the easy calm cracking just enough to confirm what Naruto already suspected. The kid was the one poking around in his head. Naruto didn't show it, his expression didn't change. He simply leaned back in his chair, popping the last bite of his snack into his mouth, and let the conversation drift back to Ilya and Lena like nothing had happened at all. But the game had changed now. That night felt different. Instead of following his usual routine, letting himself be watched while his mind drifted in the safety of his mindscape, Naruto stayed put. Settled on the worn couch, sitting still in the dark. The night stretched quiet, cold, and unmoving around the small house. The only sound in the dim-lit room was the soft tick of the old clock on the wall. Naruto sat on the couch, arms draped lazily over the back, but his expression was anything but relaxed. His sharp blue eyes stared into the dark, waiting. It wasn't long before the faintest sound brushed his ears, the shuffle of feet over creaking floorboards. Controlled, slow, but still off rhythm, too careful for someone just wandering to the kitchen for a drink. "I'd work on that sneaking if I were you," Naruto spoke casually, voice cutting through the silence without him bothering to turn his head. "You're good for a kid, but not quite there yet." Anton stood frozen in the shadowed corner, caught like a mouse. His silhouette stayed still for a long moment before reluctantly stepping forward, bare feet silent against the worn wooden floor. "I wasn't sneaking," Anton muttered, trying to sound defiant, but the slight quiver in his voice gave him away. Naruto leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his tone light but edged with knowing amusement. "You've been poking around in my head for days. You can't exactly bluff your way out now." Anton looked down, lips pressing together in a thin line. "I didn't do anything," he lied, too quickly, too rehearsed. Naruto tilted his head slightly. "Try again." Silence stretched for a few heartbeats, and then Anton finally broke, his small shoulders dropping the tension he'd been trying to hold. "I was curious," he admitted, eyes flicking up. "You didn't belong here, you felt different." "Different's a word for it." Naruto sat back, watching him more seriously now. "You've known for a while, haven't you, about yourself?" Anton's mouth twisted, the fight draining out of him. "Yeah," he mumbled, quieter. "I've always had something, ever since I can remember. I can feel people's minds, push them, read them, sometimes, change their thoughts, if I want." Naruto raised a brow slightly at the bluntness. "Mind manipulation," he muttered to himself. "That explains the prodding. How long have you been using it?" Anton shrugged, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "As long as I've had it, it's fun, like I'm a superhero. I use it when I need to, or when I'm bored." He didn't sound the least bit ashamed. Naruto's expression didn't change, but his mind was already shifting. The kid wasn't as innocent as he looked. Curious, sharp, and dangerously comfortable with power. "And the village?" Naruto asked, voice dropping lower, more serious. "The way they stared at me the second I arrived, you wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Anton hesitated, but not out of confusion, more like he was deciding if it was worth hiding. "That was me," he said at last, lifting his chin a little. "I don't like new people, they're unpredictable. I was watching you through them. I guess you're okay, though." Naruto stared at him for a long moment, the faintest frown pulling at his mouth. "You've been in their heads this whole time, haven't you, more than mine?" The boy didn't answer, his silence spoke enough. His eyes fell away, suddenly distant, as if the question itself made him uncomfortable in a way none of the others had. Naruto's voice softened just slightly. "I'm not angry, kid, you're young, and when you've got power like that, well, you figure things out the hard way sometimes. Just don't force your will on them all the time, got it? There's a difference between curiosity and control." His voice sharpened, just for a moment. "And I'd avoid trying it on me again. If you ever slip too far inside, you might not make it back out." Anton swallowed, the cocky curiosity on his face finally dampened by something close to genuine caution. He nodded once, silent. A few minutes passed between them, quiet but no longer tense. Then Anton shifted, voice softer now. "Can I ask you something?" Naruto looked over at him. "Sure." The boy's head tilted, studying him more directly this time. "How come I couldn't read you? I could sense you, but everything past the surface was like static." Naruto smiled faintly, trade secret. Anton's lips pressed together, unconvinced. "You're lying." Naruto's smile flattened, and for once he didn't dodge the truth. He sighed, leaning his head back against the couch. "You're right, I haven't really been sleeping, not in the way you'd think. Whenever I do, the past likes to drag me back, nightmares, memories, all the things I couldn't stop." Anton sat on the edge of a nearby chair, brow furrowed. "What kind of past makes you scared to sleep?" Naruto was quiet for a moment, the weight of the question settling in his chest. Then, slowly, he answered. "I'm not from here," he said softly. Anton blinked. "Yeah, I figured that. You don't act like anyone from this village." Naruto shook his head. "No, not here, not this world, I'm from somewhere else, another dimension." Anton stared, wide-eyed, not with disbelief, but curiosity. "A place of endless wars, monsters beyond anything you've seen in your worst dreams." "I fought, lost, survived," his voice went distant. "No matter how strong I got, some things couldn't be changed. That world taught me a lot, it took a lot too." The room was silent for a while, Anton sitting quietly, eyes searching Naruto's face as if trying to figure out how much more he wasn't saying. Finally, the boy broke the silence again. "Is that why you came here, to get away from it?" Naruto let out a dry laugh, low and quiet. "Partly, but mostly, I'm here for people like you." Anton tilted his head. "Like me?" Naruto nodded. "There's a place, an island, full of people with powers. Like a second chance, somewhere you don't have to hide who you are." The boy was quiet for a long while, his gaze wandering to the dark window, to the sleeping house around them. "I can't leave," he said finally. "Not even if I wanted to, this place is home, I couldn't leave Lina and Ilya behind." Naruto nodded, accepting the answer without argument. "That's your choice, I won't force it." Anton's eyes shifted back to him. "So, you're gonna leave now, since you found what you were looking for?" Naruto's lips quirked into a small, lopsided smile. "Not yet, I said I'd stay a few more days, I don't go back on my word." Over the next couple of days, Naruto started taking Anton out into the forest, teaching him the basics of hunting. It wasn't just about tracking or patience. Naruto used the time to help the kid sharpen his abilities, showing him how to use his powers on animals to sense them, predict their movements, and even nudge them without causing harm. The more time they spent out there, the more comfortable the boy became, and little by little, their conversation stretched past the usual lessons. It was the first real bit of trust either of them had shown. However, he couldn't expect the danger the boy was in. The air stank of smoke. Naruto stood at the edge of the village, snow scorched black under his boots, flames twisting high into the night. Houses crumbled in the fire, wooden beams snapping like bones. He couldn't sense a single life in the wreckage. Except one. A man stood dead center in the blaze, laughing, wild and sharp, like the flames answered to him. Naruto's fists tightened at his sides, his eyes fixed not on the man, but on the shape half lost in the fire. Anton, gone. You're a bit slow, aren't you? The voice cut through the crackling flames. The man stepped forward from the heart of the fire, a wide grin stretched across his face. But that's all right, made my job a hell of a lot easier. Naruto didn't move, his expression stayed cold, unreadable, even as the man strolled closer, casual, like the massacre behind him was nothing more than spilled milk. Shame about the kid, though, the man mused, voice low but sharp with mock regret. We could have used a mutant like him, even at his age. That kind of power is rare. But hey, at least I got what I came for. His fingers flexed, flames coiling tighter around him like obedient pets. Blood, the man smirked, though I probably shouldn't have told you that. Oh well. When I take you out, the Brotherhood might even thank me. I did what I needed, after all. He tilted his head, eyes glinting with amusement. Just don't make this boring before you die. That did it. Naruto's head tilted slightly. Then a sound slipped free, laughter. Low at first, but growing, sharp and clear, cutting right through the burning silence. His cocky grin spread across his face like nothing in the world could touch him. The man, thrown off by the reaction, hesitated. But inside, Naruto was piecing it all together, the Brotherhood, Anton's blood, the timing. It clicked fast, and the conclusion was simple: this one wasn't walking away. You really think you can take me? Naruto mused, brushing a bit of ash off his shoulder. And after wiping out a whole village, nah. I can't just let you leave breathing after that. His eyes narrowed. Name? The man scoffed, annoyed at the question. Firestarter. Naruto's grin sharpened. Figures, whoever sent you, clearly didn't tell you who I am. Does it matter? Firestarter sneered. You're just that fool who picks up mutant strays. You're no different from us, you're just playing for the wrong side. Naruto shook his head, his tone almost playful. You talk too much. And in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The flames shifted, bending away from the rush of his speed, and before Firestarter could even blink, Naruto's elbow sank into his gut. Once, twice, a third hit crumpled the mutant forward before a spinning kick cracked across his ribs, sending him flying. Naruto didn't wait. Hands flashed through seals, chakra flooding the ground. Lava projectiles burst up, slamming into Firestarter midair, keeping him helplessly suspended. Naruto launched after him, twisting through the smoke. An axe kick came down hard, bouncing the mutant off the scorched earth. Before the man could fall flat, a left hook slammed into his chest, followed by a right that sent him flying once more. Another set of seals. Naruto appeared behind him, hand coated in searing acid. The blow cracked against his back, launching Firestarter like a broken doll. Again Naruto moved, closing the gap, foot hooking under the man's side and kicking him skyward. Another blink and the blonde was already there, Wujutsu forming around his hand mid-motion. The sharpened wooden tendrils lashed forward, slamming the mutant down into the earth like a nail through steel, the ground splitting beneath the force. The wood coiled around his broken form, locking him in place like a living coffin. Naruto landed a second later, his boots settling in the ash. His expression was back to being unreadable. But his eyes were colder than the snow. The flames were dying out now, reduced to faint embers against the night sky. The smoke hung heavy, thick enough to choke the stars. Naruto stood still, his gaze resting on the ruins of the village, the place where Anton, Ilya, and Lena had once lived. Where laughter used to echo through the woods. Where trust, even if only for a brief moment, had grown. He spoke, voice low but steady, part of it meant for the boy who would never hear it, and part for the trapped man writhing in the splintered earth behind him. He was just a kid, his eyes didn't move from the burned-out homes. And you took his life away. A slow breath left him, one hand flexing at his side. I wonder, did he ever want to be a hero himself? His voice sharpened, as if trying to find some twisted meaning in the destruction. I didn't know him for long, or Ilya, or Lena. But I knew enough, I knew this village didn't deserve this. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I wish I hadn't wasted so much time on that damn hunt. Maybe then, you'd still be safe. His gaze lowered, settling over the broken pieces of what once was home. The bad man said he needed your blood for something, some reason to end your life before you had the chance to really live it. His fists clenched, the ache sharp in his chest, but his body'll tell me everything I need to know, I'll find out why he took something so precious. Another pause, his voice softened, but it held firm. If you can hear me, this doesn't mean I'm going to fall into revenge. I've seen that path before, I know where it leads, and I'll never let myself, or anyone else, walk it. He turned his head slightly, eyes flicking toward Firestarter, still locked and bleeding into the dirt. What he did to you, Anton, it didn't change anything. Not really, I was already going to deal with them, but now, his jaw tightened, now it's clear. The wind shifted, stirring the scorched ground as Naruto finally turned fully to the trapped mutant. His voice dropped lower, but the weight behind it hit harder than any fist. You hear that? His head tilted slightly, that cocky grin sliding back into place, hollow, sharp. Your little fire show didn't change my plans. I was already coming for your people. His tone grew colder, name tasting like venom on his tongue. The Brotherhood, you called it, his eyes narrowed, voice steady as stone. You may have gotten his blood, but you won't leave here alive. Firestarter coughed out a dry, broken laugh, shaking his head against the wooden binds locking him in place. Doesn't matter, the mutant rasped, lips split from blood. The DNA's already uploaded, won't change anything if I die. For a moment, Naruto said nothing, his expression barely shifting, save for the slight narrowing of his eyes. Then, as if flipping a switch, his usual smirk returned, calm, confident, deadly. I'll figure it out, he said simply. Your little group's plans. The reason you needed him, all of it, I've dealt with worse monsters than you. His voice lowered to a murmur as the wind stirred around him, chakra building beneath his skin. I already knew mutants were grouping up, I just didn't know why. His eyes flashed, but after you're gone, I will. And without another word, Naruto vanished. One flicker of motion, and he was in the sky, staring down at the blackened remains of the village below, the night air cold and silent around him. The air around Naruto grew still, his expression shifting from calm to cold focus. His hand lifted, chakra flaring out in thick waves, dark red and wild, the unmistakable signature of the tailed beast's power weaving into his own. The snow around him melted away in an instant, steam rising in heavy plumes. A dense, swirling orb of chakra began forming in his palm, growing larger, tighter, more concentrated. The Odama-tailed beast Rasengan, unstable, raw, but under Naruto's full control. His voice, quiet at first, carried into the silence. I'll make sure this place, this little village, will never be touched by outsiders again. The Rasengan pulsed, burning brighter than the flames still licking at the ruined ground. And then, he launched it. The attack consumed everything, fire, ash, and broken earth vanished beneath its crushing force, the very ground reshaping under the impact. But Naruto's precision was terrifyingly exact. Where the village once stood, the attack didn't leave destruction, it left rebirth. When the smoke and steam cleared, the snow-covered wasteland surrounding the village was unchanged. But in the heart of it, a green oasis now stood. Trees, fresh earth, and new life rooted into the soil, as if the village had left behind its own memorial, untouched by time or destruction. Not even ashes remained of Firestarter. Naruto stood there for a long moment, hands in his coat pockets, gaze on the sky before lowering it to the earth. That's the last time you'll hurt anyone, he muttered, part to himself, part to the boy he couldn't save. His eyes shifted, the purple rings of his Renni Sharingan replacing the familiar blue. The glow from them flickered faintly, his voice breaking the quiet once again. My dojutsu isn't like the others, he said softly. All of the Sharingan normal abilities have been boosted heavily, although I haven't unlocked any of the Rinnegan abilities, but luckily I won't need that for you. Naruto started deeper, his eyes landing on something that only be seen of the recently dead. An energy that only existed after death in this world. It wasn't chakra, the blonde learned the hard way, that doesn't exist it here. But what does is the soul, and the soul was all you needed to place someone in a genius tsu. Naruto quickly found it, a blue tiny, similar to chakra. It hadn't been long since the man's death. So this would still work. With one utter of Tsukuyumi he was taken into his Genjutsu, and without a second thought he began to latch onto the remnants of Firestarter's fading presence, pulling fragments of his memories directly into Naruto's mind. Images flashed. Plans, conversations, orders, faces. The Brotherhood, their goal, harvesting mutant DNA, turning it into a weapon. A drug, engineered to spread like a virus. Once airborne, it wouldn't kill mutants, only humans. An endgame designed to shift the balance of the world. Naruto's brows furrowed slightly. Deeper still, he saw a mental list, targets. Mutants whose abilities were essential to perfecting the formula. Names burned into his mind like ink on paper. When the Genjutsu finally faded, Naruto's eyes returned to normal, the usual cocky smirk tugging at his lips despite the weight of the discovery. So that's your plan, he murmured, stuffing his hands back into his coat pockets as the wind kicked up snow around him. His gaze drifted back to the green patch that now stood in place of the village. Looks like I've got a new list to hunt. And with that, he turned, vanishing into the forest's shadow. The heavy thrum of the helicopter blades rattled through Natasha's bones, her gloved fingers tapping absently against her thigh as the world below blurred into endless stretches of dark water. Her thoughts wandered, festering mostly on the new mission Fury had dropped on her, barely hours after her so-called mandatory leave had ended. She supposed she should be grateful. The vacation, as Fury liked to call it, had only lasted a week. It could have been longer, but S.H.I.E.L.D. never did let things sit quiet for long. And now, here she was, already off chasing another assignment. Not that it surprised her. What did surprise her was how little Fury had given her to work with. No target profile. No objective beyond listen and follow. Just a set of coordinates and one very clear instruction: she was to consider herself a guest. Fine. She could follow orders. But even for Fury, sending her out into the middle of nowhere, and she meant nowhere, felt a little strange. Out of all the places she imagined being sent, the last thing she'd expected was the Bermuda Triangle. The helicopter began its slow descent, rotors kicking up bursts of sea spray as it eased down onto a rocky perch barely wide enough to hold its weight. From above, the land hadn't looked like much, and now, standing this close, Natasha couldn't even be sure island was the right word for it. It was more like a jagged outcrop, a stubborn shard of earth clinging to the ocean. But she didn't complain. Things rarely made sense at first in this line of work. You learn to wait for the pieces to fall into place. The moment the skids touched down, she was moving. Boots met wet, hard stone, the salt air already sinking into her clothes. She took a few steps back, giving the pilot room to lift off, and waited until the sound of the blades was nothing more than a faint echo in the wind. Silence, just the steady crash of waves below. Natasha finally turned to face the only thing on the so-called island. A single structure stood in the center, a massive stone gate. No doors, just two weathered pillars rising from the rock like centuries long forgotten. Her sharp eyes flicked over the surface, tracing the markings carved deep into the stone. Japanese kanji, at first glance, but the longer she stared, the more she could tell something wasn't right. They weren't the kanji she knew. Their strokes were too sharp, their edges too old, and the presence they carried was heavier. And Natasha was starting to realize this wasn't just some random island, this was something far more personal. The wind shifted. She didn't hear footsteps, no rustle of clothes, no crunch of gravel, but her instincts screamed anyway. By the time Naruto had fully materialized, standing less than 10 feet from her, Natasha's gloved hands were already moving, smooth, automatic, as if her body had decided before her mind did. In a blink, two black Glocks were in her grip, leveled in perfect balance. Arms steady. Finger resting just shy of the trigger. Her expression never changed. No wide-eyed shock, no flinch, no hiss of surprise, just the cold, practiced stillness of someone who had walked into too many ambushes to be caught off guard now. She let her gaze sweep over him, the blonde hair, the faint scorch marks on his clothes, the calm, almost unreadable posture. No weapons visible, no aggressive stance, and yet something about him pulled every alarm her training had. She didn't speak, not yet, she was already working through the scenario. Natasha had spent a good part of her short break digging into the man's file. There wasn't much to work with. Just enough to confirm a few things she already suspected: cocky, dangerous, and far too interested in mutants for it to be casual. Beyond that, the records were thin. Redacted, scrambled, or scrubbed clean. One detail had stuck though, a quiet warning stamped into the higher-ups' reports: avoid at all costs. Shame no one had given her that memo before her last mission. Before she and her team were taken down in minutes. The bruises had healed, but the sting to her pride was slower to fade, not that she'd ever show it. Even with what little she knew, his strength, his speed, his clear superhuman edge, maybe even mutant, none of it explained why he'd appear here, now, without a sound. And for the life of her, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wanted her to see him. Finally, a voice cut through the quiet, smooth and easy like it hadn't been years since their first encounter. "You know, Red, I'm sorry about our first meeting, you can hold that against me as long as you want." Naruto's voice drifted lazily through the space between them. "But do you mind putting the guns down?" Natasha's grip didn't loosen right away. Instinct and experience told her to be cautious. Trained reflexes, sharp as ever, pushed the thought forward: this could be a trick. But after a few long, silent seconds, her gaze narrowed. She lowered the weapons, slowly, but her finger stayed close to the trigger. Trust was earned, and the blonde hadn't earned that yet. "What are you doing here?" she asked flatly, her voice unreadable. Naruto let out a low chuckle, his hands casually sliding into his pockets. "Man, they really don't tell you guys anything, do they? That's usually a quirk of Fury's, she replied, dry but honest. That pulled a real laugh from him, just as he turned and started toward the stone gate, the snow crunching beneath his steps. Even if you don't know why you're here, Naruto called back over his shoulder, I'm glad Nick sent you of all people. Natasha's brow lifted slightly, but she didn't reply. I mean, sorry for ruining one of your missions and all, he added, flashing her a sidelong glance, but working with Black Widow. Come on, that's gotta be somebody's dream back at S.H.I.E.L.D., right? Natasha walked a little closer, her expression cool but unreadable. Depends on the agent. Naruto gave a short chuckle, then glanced back at the gate. His tone softened, just a little. Still, glad it's you. For a moment, the cold wind filled the quiet space between them as they stood before the weathered stone gate, the strange kanji carved deep into its surface. You'll figure out why soon enough, Naruto added, his voice calmer, more serious now. But for now, welcome to the island. As they stood in front of the gate, Natasha shifted her weight slightly, glancing sideways at Naruto. The curiosity had been building since the moment she stepped onto the island. And now it was starting to edge into mild frustration. She tilted her head slightly, that's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting for now. A muscle in her jaw twitched, but she didn't press. Years of experience had taught her when people were deliberately dodging questions, and he wasn't doing it out of malice. Still, it irritated her. She wasn't used to being kept in the dark, especially not twice by the same man. Before she could fire off another question, Naruto stepped forward, placing his hand against the worn surface of the stone gate. The strange kanji etched into it pulsed faintly beneath his palm, soft at first, then brighter, as the marks ignited in a web of glowing patterns stretching out like veins. Natasha instinctively tensed as the glow brightened, her hand hovering near her holster, but before she could move, the world around them shifted, the air folded inward, light bending sharply, and then it was gone. The cold, rocky perch was replaced by the sound of distant chatter, the faint scent of food, and the soft thrum of a settled community. Natasha blinked once, her eyes adjusting as her brain caught up. The place was normal. Well, as normal as anything could look, considering the mutants. The town around her wasn't some fortress, or underground bunker, or hidden base. It looked like a slice of small-town America, modest houses, streetlights, a park, even a diner. Children were running between buildings, adults lingering on porches, people chatting over coffee as if they didn't have a care in the world. But her trained eye caught the difference. Some people had skin in shades no human naturally should, others moved with more grace than any Olympic athlete, a few even bore features that simply weren't human at all, mutants, all of them. Her face remained neutral, the well-crafted shield mask holding, but inside her mind ticked over the same thought again and again, this isn't what I expected. Naruto moved beside her, hands still casually stuffed into his pockets as he watched her reaction. I built this place for them, he said after a moment. His voice softer now. Mutants and their families, somewhere they don't have to hide or be hunted, somewhere they can actually live. Natasha glanced his way, the cold wind brushing strands of red hair across her face. A sanctuary, she said quietly, the word more observation than question. Yep, Naruto replied, eyes flicking over the town. A home, I started building it 5 years ago, figured if no one else was going to give them a future, I'd do it myself. He let the words hang for a moment, letting her take it all in. This place isn't perfect, he added, but it's the best I could make. Natasha's eyes swept over the town once more, her sharp mind already filing away the details, the layout. The number of people, the security potential, the weak points. Years of training didn't let her switch off so easily. But a small part of her, buried under all the tactics and calculation, couldn't help but quietly respect it. This wasn't what I expected, she admitted, eyes still scanning the streets. Naruto smirked a little at that, but his voice stayed steady. That makes two of us. Natasha's gaze drifted back from the town to the man standing casually at her side. Her voice stayed flat, steady, her words lining up more like evidence than conversation. That still doesn't tell me why I'm here, she said, eyes narrowing slightly. It doesn't explain you either, who you are. What you are. Why you've taken such an interest in mutants. Why S.H.I.E.L.D. seems to know next to nothing about you, or why Fury sent me to work with someone who probably should be in holding for botching one of our missions. Her expression didn't waver, no bite in her tone, just quiet pressure, the way she'd question an asset, or a target. Naruto's lips curled into a smirk as he let out a light chuckle, rocking slightly on his heels. Wow, you make me sound a lot worse than I am. He let the joke hang for a second before adding, and give me a little credit, I've done way more than just mess up one S.H.I.E.L.D. mission, I've been screwing with your people for years. Red. Her head tilted just slightly at that. But she didn't respond. Naruto's eyes flicked back toward the town, hands still buried in his pockets. Look, some facts, especially about me, are a little too personal to lay out on the first day. Gotta keep some mystery, right? Makes me more charming. A teasing glance slid her way, but Natasha's face remained unreadable. He exhaled slowly, letting a little of the playful air drop from his voice. But, I'll give you something, you're here to help me with a problem that doesn't just concern me, or the people on this island, it concerns the whole damn world. Natasha's brow twitched, but she stayed quiet, listening. As for mutants, the reason I'm interested in them is simple. I could be classified as one. His smile flickered for a moment, a rare seriousness behind his eyes. Technically I'm not, but close enough. Let's just say, I've got more in common with them than anyone else in this world. She studied him in silence, filing that away. Another puzzle piece, another half-answer. And as for S.H.I.E.L.D. not knowing much about me, his smirk returned, a little more smug this time. That's because I make sure they don't. Every time they learn something I don't like, I have a clone wipe it from their system. Clean, quiet, no trace. Her mind snagged on that one. The weight of it settled quietly behind her eyes, but she didn't let it show, no questions, no raised brows. Just another silent red flag. Naruto stretched his arms once, relaxing again. And the reason Fury sent you, simple, I've got to deal with him, technically too. This problem I'm dealing with, solving it helps everyone. Even your bosses, even you, so, Fury sent the best agent he had on short notice. His gaze slid back to her, the easy smile flattening into something just a little more serious. So, any other questions? For a moment, Natasha didn't answer. Her mind worked through the conversation, threading together each half-truth, every carefully placed gap, and the way he never quite gave her enough. It wasn't carelessness, it was control. This man was used to keeping things close, to handing out just enough to hold people off. And not a word more. She didn't like it. But at the same time, her instincts weren't screaming danger the way they should have been, not yet. If his half-truths were even remotely true, that meant whatever this was, it was big. Bigger than the island, bigger than S.H.I.E.L.D. It meant she was needed, for whatever reason, to help stop whatever danger the world had coming next. And honestly, that didn't feel all that new. Just another secret war civilians would never hear about. So while she remained suspicious of the man, a man who, so far, seemed only capable of irritating her more than most, she decided she'd give him just enough trust to see this through. Not fully. Not blind trust, but enough for what was needed. Her expression stayed cool and unreadable as her eyes shifted back to him. Aside from your full name, she asked, voice dry and steady. No, Naruto's grin widened, easy and unbothered, like he'd been waiting for her to ask. Uzumaki Naruto, he answered simply, the name rolling off his tongue with a bit of playful weight. Now you've got one more piece of the puzzle, he added, flashing her a quick wink before turning his gaze back toward the town. With that, the two made their way through the quiet streets until Naruto stopped in front of what looked like a simple ramen shop, tucked between a few modest buildings. He turned to her with a grin that was far too pleased for someone in the middle of world-threatening business. Best ramen in this dimension, hands down. The word choice stuck. Dimension, not Earth. Natasha didn't let it show, but the detail was already filed neatly away in the growing list of questions she intended to revisit. That list only got longer as she sat across from him, watching the blonde tear through bowl after bowl of ramen like it was nothing. By the time he hit his 10th, she was no longer surprised, just quietly adjusting her expectations of what exactly counted as normal around him. Finally, Naruto leaned back in his seat, waving the chef off as another bowl slid his way. "Break time," he said casually, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Figured I should explain the mission first, then I'll go back to eating." Natasha didn't comment, but the entire interaction, the appetite, the word choice, the easy confidence, all settled into the same mental folder: more questions, fewer answers. But for now, she stayed patient. The mission would tell her enough, or at least, enough to move forward. Naruto leaned forward, elbows resting lazily on the table, spinning his chopsticks between his fingers as if the conversation didn't carry the weight it did. "So," he started, voice light, but his expression sharpening slightly. "Here's what I've got so far." Natasha gave a small nod, leaning back, arms crossed, her focus fully locked on him now. "There's a group called the Brotherhood, and they are recruiting mutants," he started. "They are also hunting specific ones, not for their powers, but for their DNA." His fingers stopped spinning the chopsticks, setting them down neatly across the bowl. "They're trying to make a weapon, a virus, if I had to guess, something engineered to target humans and leave mutants untouched." His tone stayed even, but Natasha could see the tension under it, the pieces he'd already put together before she was even brought in. "Firestarter, a mutant I fought right before coming here, burned down a village just to find one mutant that was needed. I put him down. And used one of my abilities to tell me the rest." That caught Natasha's attention, just another thing she would have to file away. Just how many powers did this man have? "They've got the first mutant's blood," said Naruto before he paused, a dark look on his face before his blank one returned. "I have the roster of mutants they're trying to track down. If they get them all, that virus won't stay theoretical for long." Natasha let the silence hang, her mind working through the implications. It was the kind of plan that fit too well with the world she knew: quiet wars, invisible enemies, civilians blissfully unaware until it was too late. But this time, the stakes were higher. Species level high. "Do you know where the other mutants are?" she asked. "Not exactly," Naruto gave a small shrug, the weight of the problem barely breaking his relaxed posture. "But I've got a lead on one. The others are either hiding very well, or already being watched by the Brotherhood, maybe even both." Another pause passed between them before Natasha finally spoke, her voice steady but firm. "Then we find them first." Naruto's grin returned, sharp and approving. "Exactly what I was thinking." She let out a quiet breath, more to herself than to him. It wasn't the first time she'd been sent on a mission like this, hunting ghosts before someone else turned them into corpses. But the company was new, and that alone made the whole situation feel like uncharted territory. "All right," she said simply. "Where do we start?" Naruto tilted his head, eyes flicking toward the window, staring out at the fading sun over the quiet island. "I've got a name," he answered, pushing his empty bowl aside. "A location too, but we'll have to move fast." And for the first time since she'd stepped onto the island, Natasha felt like the real mission had finally begun. The list wasn't long: shorter than Natasha had expected, honestly. Aside from the first mutant, whose DNA Naruto explained the Brotherhood had already secured, only 4 names remained. 4 people. And the entire world could be at risk. First was Storm, a woman known for her command over weather, often favoring lightning and thunder. The name alone was enough to mark her as dangerous, and exactly the kind of power the Brotherhood would want. Second was X-23, a so-called failed attempt at recreating another well-known mutant. Failed, at least, in the eyes of the people who created her. Naruto had barely said the name before catching the subtle shift in Natasha's expression, one he filed away for later. Third on the list was Darwin, another famous mutant, known for his ability to adapt to practically anything. He had disappeared off the grid long before Naruto had ever stepped foot on Earth. And likely even before that. Tracking him wouldn't be easy. And last was Mystique. Out of all the names, hers was the one Naruto least looked forward to finding. A mutant capable of becoming anyone, vanishing for years at a time without a trace. Even with his own transformation abilities far outmatching hers, Mystique was a master of staying hidden. Luckily, the first name on the list, the only one Naruto had any real information on, was Storm. It made sense to start with her. Out of the 4, she was the only lead they had, and every second wasted meant the Brotherhood had a chance to move first. Naruto had explained that Storm hadn't been sighted in any major cities or mutant communities. Which wasn't surprising given her power and the attention it could draw. Instead, scattered reports and whispers pointed toward a remote village deep in the heart of Africa, a place so isolated it didn't even show up on most maps. From what little intel he'd gathered, the village wasn't just hiding her. They were worshipping her. That doesn't surprise me, Natasha had said, arms crossed, recalling her briefing. A woman who can summon lightning on command, to a place with no tech, no cities, that's a goddess, not a person. Naruto simply nodded. Yeah, problem is, we're not the only ones who'd figure that out. He didn't have to say the rest. The Brotherhood might already be on their way. Or worse, already there. Their first mission was set: head to the village, find Storm, and secure her before anyone else could. The trip to Africa had been long, but the silence between them wasn't heavy. If anything, it was comfortably quiet, the kind of quiet you settle into with someone you've started to tolerate. Their transport dropped them off miles from their destination, the rest of the path too rough for any vehicle. The air was heavy, thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your skin and refused to let go. The pair moved through the dense brush, boots pressing into damp earth, both sharp-eyed and cautious. Natasha walked a few paces ahead, her gaze cutting through the trees. While Naruto moved with casual ease, hands resting behind his head like this was a morning stroll rather than a mission. Village is about another mile out, Naruto said, glancing up at the tree canopy. You'd think a goddess would pick somewhere easier to reach. Or maybe she didn't have a choice, Natasha replied, stepping over a root. People like us rarely do. Naruto's head tilted slightly at that, the easygoing smirk softening on his face. That sounds personal. Natasha didn't break stride. Just an observation. For a moment, the conversation settled into silence again, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and distant animal calls. Then Naruto glanced sideways at her. Back at the island, you said you were used to secrets and half-truths, he started casually. Still trust me enough to believe this mission isn't some wild goose chase? Natasha's expression barely shifted. I don't trust easily, but if the Brotherhood wants Storm, that makes her important. And if you're serious about stopping them, then for now, I'll give you just enough trust to get this done. Naruto let out a quiet chuckle, fair enough. They moved on, the trees starting to thin. Off in the distance, the faint outline of simple mud and wood structures came into view, tucked against the slope of a hill, the village. Naruto's easy demeanor shifted just slightly, the weight of the mission finally settling onto his shoulders. Looks like we're here. Natasha scanned the buildings, noticing the lack of movement, the strange quiet hanging over the place. Her instincts immediately prickled. Too quiet. Yeah, Naruto's voice dropped a bit lower. Either they're hiding from us, or from someone else. He let the thought hang, both of them knowing the odds weren't great. The village sat still, not a single soul in sight. The wind shifted, rustling through the trees, but the houses remained lifeless, doors shut tight, windows dark. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he and Natasha approached the first worn-out fence marking the village's edge. His voice lowered, careful. Definitely hiding, he muttered. Or they were warned. Natasha circled the nearest home, sharp eyes scanning every shadow. Her instincts were still buzzing, her gut told her this was too easy. Too clean. They knew we were coming, she said under her breath, almost certain. But before either of them could take another step, the ground beneath their feet suddenly shifted. An instant later, sharpened wooden spikes snapped up from the earth, stopping just short of impaling them, a trap designed to hold, not kill. A split-second reaction had Natasha pulling a sidearm, but before she could fire, figures emerged from the tree-line, villagers, masked and armed with spears and old rifles, surrounding them in tight formation. Naruto raised his hands lazily, more amused than worried. Well, can't say I didn't expect a warm welcome, but this is a little dramatic, don't you think? Natasha didn't bother lowering her gun. Her expression stayed neutral, reading the situation, but her body was tense and ready, trained to react, even cornered. One of the villagers, an older man, his face partially hidden under a hand-carved mask, stepped forward and spoke in a calm but firm voice. You've trespassed on sacred land, outsiders are not welcome. Natasha was already preparing a response, but Naruto tilted his head, stepping half a pace forward, his voice casual but layered with authority. We're not here for trouble. We're here for your goddess. A long silence followed. Whispers spread like wildfire through the small crowd, tension sharpening in the air. The villagers stiffened, weapons tightening. The older man studied Naruto for a moment, then motioned to two others. The villagers didn't lower their weapons, but the spears shifted slightly, a silent order for them to move. Take them. Neither Natasha nor Naruto resisted as they were ushered through the village, though Natasha's gaze flicked to him, studying his expression out of the corner of her eye. He looked too calm for someone who'd just been offered up to strangers with weapons. You were awfully quick to offer us up, she muttered, her voice low, almost testing. Naruto's lips curled into that same infuriatingly casual grin. Sometimes you get more answers as a prisoner than a guest. Typical. She wasn't sure if the laid-back attitude came from confidence or arrogance, but the more time she spent with him, the more she realized how easily he leaned on instinct. Dangerous, but calculated, like someone who'd lived through enough fights to know when it was better to wait than strike. And if that doesn't work? Then I'll improvise. Of course, that part didn't surprise her either. From what little she'd seen, improvise seemed to be his go-to strategy, and for some reason, it worked for him. That was the part she didn't like. Too unpredictable. Too risky. They were led deeper into the village, and Natasha let her eyes do the work, committing the layout to memory, noting the guards, the hidden paths, the natural cover. The soldier in her never stopped working, even when her hands were bound loosely at her sides. When they reached the back of the village, her attention shifted, not to the armed men, but to the figure standing beneath the ancient, gnarled tree. A woman with dark skin, white hair braided back tight, and piercing, almost regal eyes. Storm. The pieces clicked fast. Even before Naruto spoke, Natasha recognized the woman. There were few mutants as infamous as her, even fewer who could command the kind of quiet respect that had this entire village on edge. But what caught Natasha's attention more was Naruto. His easy posture was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier. So this wasn't just another name on the list. This was personal. Naruto's expression lost its smirk for the first time, shifting into something more serious, a mix of familiarity and old respect. "Looks like the goddess showed up after all," he murmured. Storm stepped forward, her expression unreadable as her gaze settled on Naruto. "It's been a long time," she said, voice calm but edged with something heavier, not quite cold, but a firm warning sat behind her words. Naruto offered a slight nod, respectful but relaxed. "You look good, Storm. Guess living away from the rest of the world suits you." Storm's eyes flicked past him to Natasha for a moment, before settling back on him. "It suits the people here more than it suits me," her gaze sharpened. "Why are you here, Naruto?" There was no easy way to say it, and judging by the way the guards held their weapons ready, he wasn't going to get many chances to explain. "It's not just me," Naruto said, voice steady. "There's a problem brewing, the kind that's bigger than politics, bigger than borders. A group called the Brotherhood has been moving quietly for years, but they've finally made their play. They've got a scientist developing a weapon, a bioweapon. One that targets humans specifically." Storm's lips pressed into a thin line, but her face remained composed. "That explains why you're here," she said, glancing at Natasha again, "but not why you brought an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. into my home." Naruto followed her gaze but didn't flinch, because this isn't just about mutants anymore. If they succeed, it won't stop at one species, and I can't fight this alone. Naruto let out a quiet breath, his gaze lowering for a moment before locking back with hers. For a moment, Storm said nothing, letting the weight of his words settle between them. The soft rustle of the wind moved through the village like nature itself was listening in on the conversation. "You've got one day," she finally said, lifting her chin slightly. "You're guests for now, you'll be watched, and you'll leave at sunrise. With or without what you came for." Naruto nodded once, accepting the terms, even if they weren't ideal. As the villagers dispersed, the guards lowered their weapons, though their eyes stayed sharp. Storm turned away, disappearing into the crowd with her usual quiet grace. Naruto let out a slow breath, watching her retreat. "She didn't slam the door in my face, that's something." His history with the woman was more of an annoying brother if anything, he was just glad he wasn't immediately dismissed. He felt Natasha shift slightly at his side, no doubt already filing away the village layout and the faces of every guard. "All right," he muttered under his breath, glancing sideways at her, "we've got one day, no fights, no stunts, just enough time to make her see what's coming." His eyes flicked toward the canopy where the sky cracked blue overhead. "No lies, no tricks, just the truth. If she won't believe me now, the Brotherhood will make sure she finds out the hard way, and I'm not letting it get that far." With the day in hand, Naruto's mind moved quickly. There'd be no forcing Storm's hand, no winning her over by brute strength. You don't fight for people like her. You remind them why they started fighting in the first place. The night air was cooler under the open sky, the fire crackling in the center of the small gathering. Villagers sat scattered around in quiet conversation, some watching the flames, others watching them, the outsiders. Naruto leaned back on his hands, seated comfortably beside Natasha, his posture relaxed even if his mind was anything but. She sat straighter, her eyes still scanning the edges of the darkened village, like habit alone kept her sharp. After a moment, she tilted her head slightly toward him, voice low enough not to carry. "So what's the plan now?" she asked, eyes still on the fire. "Improvisation got us guest privileges for a day and a warning to leave at sunrise. At this rate, she'll be here for the Brotherhood to scoop up the second we're gone. Her tone stayed neutral. But the meaning was clear, they were wasting time. Naruto let out a soft chuckle, his grin tugging lazily at the corner of his mouth. Man, you really don't ease up, do you? His teasing earned him a sideways glance, Natasha's signature glare sharpening, not a full one, but enough for him to know she wasn't in the mood for games. He held up his hands in mock surrender, still smiling. Relax, Red, I'm not stalling, I've thought this through. His expression shifted, more serious as his gaze drifted back to the fire. If I attacked Storm, even if I was holding back, the entire village would jump in. People would get hurt, innocent people. His voice stayed calm, but firm. That's not how I do things, not when there's another way. Natasha studied him for a beat, not doubting his strength, but weighing the part of him that chose not to use it. And there's another reason, he added after a moment. His voice dropped, lower and more personal, as though part of him wasn't entirely comfortable admitting it. I don't want to force her into this, she's been through enough, and there's history there, some things don't sit right with me. Natasha didn't push for details, not yet, but her mind filed it away like all the other half-answers he'd given her. So, she prompted, what's the plan then? Naruto shifted, stretching his legs out as if the conversation wasn't about global threats and biological weapons. Simple, he said. Convince her if I can, let her make her own choice. He turned his eyes toward the stars, voice steady. But if that doesn't work, I leave a clone behind. One strong enough to hold the Brotherhood off if they show, without the village ever realizing there was a fight. It was smart, clean, efficient. Typical of someone who'd done this too many times. Natasha's brow creased slightly, thoughtful, if that's all you needed, why stay here at all? Why not leave now and let your clone handle it? Naruto's gaze flicked to her, the grin returning, but there was something softer behind it this time. You've probably put it together by now, me and Storm, we've got history. His tone dropped the playfulness for a heartbeat, just long enough to let the truth sit. She deserves more than a clone and a goodbye, besides, his eyes returned to the flames. If she does decide to help, we'll need her. I've seen enough fights to know we can't afford to turn away allies, especially when we don't know how many the Brotherhood's already got. That answer sat with Natasha longer than the others. History, that explained the way he spoke to Storm, the ease behind the sharpness. But it didn't make it easier to trust the plan. Still, there was a logic to it, a strange kind of patience wrapped in quiet conviction. He wasn't the kind of person she was used to. His approach was messier, but it was clear he'd spent years fighting wars that never made the news. He doesn't talk like a soldier, but he thinks like one. She wasn't sure if she trusted him, not completely. But the facts lined up, and so far, his choices matched his words. For now, that would have to be enough. The crackle of the fire was the only real sound between them, the flames casting long shadows across the quiet village. Most of the locals had long since retreated to their homes, leaving only the occasional flicker of movement in the dark, a reminder that even as guests, eyes were always watching. Naruto stood, brushing off his pants, and gave a glance toward Natasha, who watched him with that same unreadable calm. He stretched lazily, but his mind was sharp, already working through his next move. "I'll be back," he said casually, stepping away from the fire. She didn't stop him, just tracked him as he walked off into the night. It wasn't hard to find Storm, she stood alone near the ancient tree, looking up at the stars. The same strong posture, the same quiet confidence. Naruto slowed as he approached, hands in his pockets. "You still don't trust me," he said, still with a smirk, voice low but not accusing. Storm didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the sky. "You haven't given me much reason to." There was a pause, but Storm didn't interrupt. That was enough of an invitation for him. Mutants like you, Storm, the group I mentioned, they are after your DNA. There are other targets, other famous mutants, even some old friends like Darwin, you are their targets. Storm finally turned her head, studying him from the corner of her eye. Targets for what? A bioweapon, one designed to wipe out humans. His voice was even, without exaggeration or drama. They already have some of the samples, they don't need you to volunteer, just to stand still long enough for them to get what they want. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Storm's gaze returned to the sky. I've spent too many years fighting other people's wars, she said softly, her voice carrying that weight of experience. When I came here, I gave these people my word. They protect me, and I protect them. Leaving with you would mean breaking that. Naruto scratched the back of his head, letting out a quiet breath. I get it, I do, his voice softened slightly. I've had people I wanted to protect, too, still do. His eyes flicked back toward the village, where the faint glow of the campfire still burned in the distance, but Storm could tell he wasn't thinking about the village or his new partner, he was looking past that, to his home, the one that they created together. Staying here won't stop them from coming. The Brotherhood will show, and when they do, they won't care about this village's peace, or your promises. Storm was silent again, her expression unreadable. I'm not here to twist your arm, Naruto added, his voice more subdued now. But you deserve to know the risk, I'm giving you the choice I never got. She finally turned fully to face him, the look in her eyes still guarded, but less distant than before. You've seen this before? Naruto hesitated, just long enough for her to notice, and then nodded once. Not exactly the same, definitely similar. He smiled a little, but there was no humor in it. People like us don't usually get happy endings, do we? Storm exhaled slowly. I appreciate the warning, Naruto. But my answer's still no. His smile didn't fade, though the weight in his chest settled a little heavier. Can't blame me for trying, he replied, turning to leave. But, I'll still be around. Naruto walked back to the fire at a steady, unhurried pace, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets, though his mind wandered far ahead of his feet. This was going to be harder than he thought. If Storm was this set on staying hidden, what were the chances Darwin would be any different? He didn't even know where Darwin was, only rumors, and those were thin at best. If the others chose to stay in hiding too, unwilling to listen, unwilling to act, would the world really have to pay the price for their past scars? Naruto let out a quiet sigh, the kind that only grew heavier the longer it sat in his chest. His steps carried on, but his mind stalled, caught in that bitter thought. No, that wasn't the way to think. Even if Storm and Darwin refused, it didn't mean the other two, X-23 and Mystique, would refuse. Hopefully they didn't, he had no info on them, both were wild cards at best. But he'd manage, he always had, he was used to standing alone. All that really mattered was making sure the Brotherhood never got close to them. That, at least, was something he could control. Naruto settled back near the fire, dropping onto the log beside Natasha. His gaze flicking toward the quiet village surrounding them. We might need a plan B, he said after a long pause. Natasha didn't look at him right away, eyes fixed on the flames, arms resting loosely across her knees. I already suspected as much. A soft chuckle rumbled from his chest. That obvious, huh? Yes, her tone stayed flat, dry, and unbothered. But the next moment, her gaze shifted toward him, still cold, still calculated, and her next question landed sharp. What's your history with Storm? Naruto leaned back, tilting his head slightly as he studied her expression. Blank as ever, but even through that shield, he caught the edge of curiosity tucked just beneath the surface. You don't have to hide it, you know, he said, a quiet note slipping into his voice. That cold, calculating stare, it doesn't do much, I can still tell when I annoy you. His eyes lingered on hers a second longer, soft but sharp, and I can tell other things too. Natasha didn't flinch, didn't offer a real answer, just one brow arched slightly higher in reply. Naruto exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. My history with Storm isn't anything important. His voice was lighter now, almost playful. I didn't think it'd be that interesting to you. He let the corner of his mouth curl into a teasing grin. But I guess since it has to do with me, you'd be a little crazy about it. That got a reaction. Her gaze narrowed, sharp as a blade, though her body didn't move an inch. Naruto laughed, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. Internally, though, the amusement was thinner, more relief than anything. He'd sidestepped her questions, for now. Naruto's laugh lingered in the air, light and easy, but his thoughts had already drifted away from the conversation. The quiet between them settled for just a moment, before the night itself seemed to shift. A low, distant hum rolled over the treetops. Naruto's head snapped up, eyes narrowing as the sound grew sharper, mechanical, unmistakable. The crackling of the fire was swallowed by the approaching roar of engines. Sleek and too advanced for any standard military. Before Natasha could even voice her own suspicion, the shape of a black, high-tech aircraft cut through the sky overhead, its edges glinting against the moonlight as it descended. Naruto stood in one smooth motion, gaze locking on the craft. Well, he muttered, the humor gone from his voice, looks like Plan B's about to start on its own. The aircraft hovered for only a breath before the hatch split open. Figures dropped from the belly of the ship, Brotherhood operatives, armed and moving with clear purpose. They weren't here to scout. They were here for Storm. Natasha was already rising beside him, hand subtly brushing her sidearm. Sharp gaze tracking the figures as they spread out and advanced toward the village. Naruto's hands flexed at his sides, jaw tightening. Guess the talk will have to wait, he muttered, the easy grin from before long gone. The moment the Brotherhood's boots hit the dirt, the night exploded into motion. Shouts rang out from the villagers as the warning spread, men and women scrambling for weapons, old rifles, spears, even sharpened farming tools, anything to defend their home. Naruto's expression shifted, all trace of casual ease vanishing as he watched the mutants fan out, targeting the village with ruthless efficiency. But there was no panic in his posture, if anything. He seemed almost amused. Let's see if these guys are better than Firestarter, he muttered under his breath, cracking his knuckles as he moved. With a single burst of speed, he was gone from Natasha's side. The first Brotherhood mutant lunged for a cluster of villagers, only for Naruto to intercept, his hand moving so fast it was nearly invisible. One clean strike and the mutant crumpled to the ground. Another came from behind. Naruto didn't even look. A sidestep, a lazy flick of his wrist, and the attacker was sent crashing into the dirt. It was a rhythm for him, moving through the battlefield like a blur, weaving between mutants before they even realized he was there. To him, it wasn't a fight, it was a game. Meanwhile, Natasha held her ground, sharp and controlled, every shot landing with precision. She worked cleanly, focusing on disabling rather than killing, a sharp contrast to Naruto's fluid and taunting style. The villagers, untrained but determined, joined the fray, using sheer numbers and grit to hold their ground with spears and whatever else they could grab. Their home was under attack, and none of them were willing to let it fall without a fight. Between the three, Naruto, Natasha, and the villagers, the Brotherhood's ambush quickly started to fall apart. Pausing in the middle of the fight, Naruto's gaze flicked toward the far end of the village, where he'd last seen Storm. His instincts were already screaming the truth, the Brotherhood wasn't here to burn the village down, they were here for her. He moved back toward Natasha, ducking around a mutant still trying to scramble back to his feet. "They're after Storm, I'm going to make sure they don't get what they came for." Natasha barely glanced his way, squeezing off another clean shot that dropped a would-be attacker at her flank. "Go," she said, sharp and certain. "I've got this side covered." Naruto flashed a quick, easy grin, the calm before the storm, and was gone in the blink of an eye, heading straight for Storm's last position. Naruto's feet moved on their own, swift but controlled, weaving between the scattered remains of the Brotherhood's ambush as he made his way toward the clearing. The sharp scent of ozone still hung in the air, evidence of Storm's power crackling through the night. The moment he broke through the last wall of brush, his eyes locked onto her. Storm stood beneath the twisted branches of the old tree, her breath steady but her stance sharp, lightning flickering around her fingers as she kept her attackers at bay. The Brotherhood's mutants were closing in on her from all sides, their faces half-lit by the electric burst sparking across the clearing. Naruto didn't hesitate. "Cutting it a little close." "Don't you think?" Storm called out dryly as she let a bolt fly, knocking two mutants flat before pivoting for another strike. "Wouldn't be me if I didn't," Naruto shot back, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as he blurred forward. His body weaved effortlessly through the fray, movements sharp and fluid, ducking under a wild energy blast before driving his elbow into the attacker's gut, dropping him in a single, practiced motion. One by one, he carved a path through the chaos, never striking to kill, just precise, disabling hits that left the Brotherhood fighters unconscious on the ground, like chess pieces knocked clean off the board. Beside him, Storm fought with practiced grace. Her power arcing through the air with raw control, matching the storm brewing overhead in perfect rhythm. Together, the fight began to tilt in their favor. But even as the last of their attackers crumpled to the dirt, Naruto could see it in her eyes, this wasn't a victory. Her breathing slowed as the adrenaline faded, and her hand lifted, revealing a torn strip of cloth clenched in her fingers. "They got what they came for," she said, her voice low and heavy. "Before you arrived, one of them took my DNA." The words hung in the air like a stone, sinking fast into the pit of his stomach. Naruto's smirk had long since vanished, his gaze falling to the scrap in her hand. For all his speed, all his strength, he'd been too late. His mind spiraled, calculating, retracing the timeline. If they had Storm's DNA already, it meant the Brotherhood wasn't just testing the waters. They were striking with precision, and faster than he'd expected. If they moved this quickly here, the others on the list might not stand a chance. Storm's voice pulled him back to the present. "Come on, let's make sure the others are safe." He nodded once, silent, and the two of them started back through the undergrowth toward the village, the crackle of dying storm clouds still lingering overhead. When they returned, the village was a scene of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Fires burned low, the wounded were being tended to, and the last remnants of the Brotherhood had either fled or been buried under the efforts of the villagers' defenses. Near the remains of the old fire pit, Natasha stood calmly reloading her weapons, as if the fight had barely ruffled her at all. Her eyes flicked toward the approaching pair, reading every detail in their faces before Naruto even said a word. "They got it, didn't they?" she asked flatly, her tone offering no room for lies. Naruto paused, then gave the smallest nod, "Yeah." He crouched down near her, rubbing the back of his neck, a quiet sigh slipping out. "Looks like we're not gonna get much breathing room between stops." Natasha slid a fresh magazine into her weapon, her gaze still fixed on him, sharp and calculating. "At least now I've seen what they're really after, up close." Storm stood a few feet away, arms folded, silent, still watching them both. She hadn't said much since their return, but the weight in her eyes spoke volumes. These two were treating this like a mission, like another day in a long war, while her entire world had nearly been ripped out from under her. Naruto stood again, brushing the dirt from his hands, and turned to face her fully. His voice softened, lowering from its usual casual rhythm. You should come to the island. Storm's brow lifted slightly, but he pressed on. They'll come back, if not to bring you in, then to make sure you can't stop them later. Either way, your people are in their path. Her gaze drifted to the villagers, some nursing wounds, others rebuilding what little the attack had shattered, and the sharp edge to her posture softened, her hands lowering just a bit. Temporary, she said at last, her voice quiet but resolute. I'll come, until I know they won't return. Naruto's expression lightened, though his eyes still held a shadow of concern. That's all I ask. A little while later, with the fires burning low and the village beginning to quiet, Naruto and Natasha stood a short distance from the others, their conversation low and steady as they both watched the smoke rising into the night sky. So, Natasha started, arms crossed, voice still cool but thoughtful. That's what they are like, multiple mutants, each with unique powers, and there were a lot, so there must be more. Naruto nodded once, his gaze distant, still locked on the dark horizon. They're not wasting time, he muttered. Which means we can't either. Natasha was silent for a beat, letting her mind process the situation. Seeing the Brotherhood's work firsthand, the methodical way they targeted Storm, only hardened her suspicions about just how far their plans reached. Where to next? She asked quietly. Naruto exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Wherever the next one on the list is. His voice was steady, but she could hear the weight behind it, the creeping realization that this was only going to get harder. But behind the seriousness, there was something else, too, the steady way he stood, the calm despite the loss, the way he still found room to be light around her. That part of him was becoming hard to ignore. After some time passed, Natasha called in a Quinjet, mostly for the onboard systems and shields database access. They'd need every file, every scrap of intel, if they were going to stay one step ahead on the next mission. Now, Naruto stood near the center of the aircraft, high above the clouds, surrounded by polished metal, humming tech. And the low static buzz of the engines. In one hand, a small sphere of raw chakra pulsed, flickering like a living flame in his palm. Boredom tugged at him, and the orb had become little more than a toy while Natasha guided the Quinjet higher and higher. He'd asked once why they were climbing so much, and why she wouldn't just let him teleport them to where they needed to go, but as expected, she shot the suggestion down without much of an explanation. Not that it really bothered him. The way he saw it, the harder it was for them to track the next mutants, the harder it would be for the Brotherhood too. Time wasn't something they were out of, not yet. And besides, arguing with a beautiful woman wasn't high on his to-do list. A few more quiet minutes passed, the blue chakra sphere flickering lazily between his fingers, before Natasha finally stepped away from the cockpit. She flicked the Quinjet onto autopilot, her movements smooth and confident, before walking toward him. Her stride wasn't casual, it was the kind of walk that came from years of training, control baked into every muscle. Calculated. Predatory. Seductive, in a way that wasn't designed for attention, but command. Naruto let out a low sigh as the chakra sphere quietly dispersed into the air, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. They settled into an easy rhythm, or at least, easy for them. Even with the stakes hanging heavy in the air. Naruto's voice still carried that same playful tone, like the weight of the world hadn't quite reached his shoulders yet. But playful didn't mean careless. As the Quinjet sailed steady through the skies, their conversation stayed on track, cycling through the list of names until the obvious answer hung between them. X-23, Natasha said first, her voice cutting clean through the air. She's the best next step. Naruto gave a slow nod, leaning back slightly against the wall of the jet, arms crossed. That quick, didn't even hesitate. His blue eyes flicked to her, sharp enough to notice the shift, the tiniest pause, the small weight tucked behind her words. There was something else under the surface. Something deeper than just mission logic, but he didn't press, not yet. Natasha's gloved fingers moved smoothly over the console, activating a glowing holographic interface that stretched across the space between them. Files, images, coordinates. She worked with precision, speaking as the system loaded. Luckily, I already ran research on this particular mutant, a while back, she said, as if it were just another routine job. Naruto blinked, head tilting slightly at that. For something else, huh? The question was gentle, but the curiosity wasn't subtle. Natasha's expression stayed cold, but there was more emotion showing now than usual, a soft twitch at the corner of her mouth. A faint tension in her gaze that betrayed her. Mind your business, Blondie. The answer wasn't sharp, but it was enough of a wall. Naruto lifted his hands in mock surrender, the smallest smile curling at the edge of his mouth. All right, respecting your privacy, for now. They let the conversation settle back into the mission as Natasha leaned forward, swiping through files on the floating display. Last confirmed sighting was Russia, but these weren't clean reports, just fragments, civilian sightings, a few corrupted security feeds. I've been piecing together the trail for a while now. Naruto's brow raised slightly at that. You've done a lot of research on her. Natasha, without missing a beat, shut the conversation down with a cool, don't push it. She turned, making her way back to the front of the jet, sliding easily into the pilot's seat. Go through what I've already pulled up, I'll get us in range. Naruto lingered for a moment, watching her, his thoughts drifting. There was something more going on, something personal, but he knew better than to pry, at least for now. With a quiet exhale, he turned his focus to the flickering hologram in front of him, scrolling through the files Natasha had already prepared. Naruto leaned against the console, eyes flicking lazily across the files Natasha had gathered. Line after line of data scrolled past, reports. Photos, scattered logs from places that barely put themselves on the map. But the name that kept surfacing in all of it wasn't X-23. It was Wolverine. A supposed failed clone of the mutant, or at least, that's what the people who created her believed. But the more Naruto read, the less the word failure seemed to fit. It wasn't hard to piece together what had really happened. Raised in captivity. Conditioned. Trained as a weapon. Someone who was never meant to have a choice in the first place. Naruto's expression dimmed, his usual easygoing air giving way to quiet thought. So much like me, more than I'd like to admit. He was still lost in that thought when Natasha's boots echoed back through the Quinjet, breaking the silence. She walked past him, casually pulling on a heavy snow jacket, the kind designed for bitter winters and sub-zero air. You might want more than just that black cloak, she said, glancing sideways at him as she zipped her coat. It's cold this time of year. Naruto glanced down at his usual outfit, dark, simple, streaks of orange tracing through the fabric like embers waiting to burn. His cloak rested comfortably across his shoulders, light as always. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm too strong to be worried about a little cold. Natasha gave an exaggerated roll of her eyes, her expression shifting into the closest thing to fond exasperation. Suit yourself. She pulled her gloves on, stepping past him toward the front once more. Naruto, meanwhile, stretched his arms lazily behind his head, still staring at the last file open on the hologram, a blurred photo of a girl with sharp eyes and a heavy past. Looks like the next mission won't be easy either, he thought, the smirk fading back into a quiet line. The Quinjet glided lower, slicing through the thick cloud cover until the snowy wilderness stretched wide beneath them. The dense tree-line, untouched and sprawling, looked the same for miles, quiet, cold, and empty. But Natasha's voice cut through the stillness, steady and sharp. I've mapped out the area, based on the last few sightings and her movement patterns. She's most likely somewhere along this stretch. She tapped a location on the holomap projected in front of them. Dense cover, enough wildlife to mask her tracks. If she's still feral, she won't wander far from here. Naruto's eyes stayed on the map, but his mind drifted back to the reports he'd read. His fingers tapped idly against his leg. So, she's still stuck in that state, animal-like tendencies, no real reasoning, no human logic. He leaned back slightly, eyeing the coordinates. How are we supposed to reach her before the Brotherhood does, let alone talk her down? Natasha's gloved hand hovered over the projection, her voice dry but sure. We don't talk her down. Naruto's gaze flicked toward her. All we have to do is destroy the chip they embedded in her brain. A single, well-placed shot will do the trick, her healing factor will handle the rest. Naruto raised an eyebrow, lips pulling into a slight frown. That little detail wasn't in the files you gave me. Natasha was quiet for a moment, her gaze flicking out the cockpit window, not cold this time, more thoughtful. Not everything's in the files. The words hung there for a beat, unspoken weight in the space between them. Naruto's expression softened just a little, his voice quieter but edged with curiosity. You've been looking for her for a while, haven't you? Natasha didn't answer, but the look she gave him was enough. Calculated walls still up, but thinner now, more see-through. Naruto let it go, for now, and instead leaned back against the seat with a sigh. Guess I'll just follow your lead, then. The Quinjet touched down in the clearing, snow swirling up around its landing gear as the engines slowly powered down. Natasha moved first, pulling her hood up against the bitter cold, stepping toward the hatch. Naruto stood beside her, still in his usual black cloak, unaffected by the chill. With a press of a button, the Quinjet shimmered, vanishing into the air as its cloaking system activated. The two of them stepped out into the quiet white wilderness, their breath rising in soft clouds. Naruto stretched his arms, glancing at the treeline. All right, he muttered, cracking a smile. Let's go find our lost wolf. The forest was eerily quiet, broken only by the muffled crunch of boots through snow. Naruto and Natasha moved in tandem, eyes sharp, scanning the treeline for any sign of movement. Hours had passed, but neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, only focused. Both knew they weren't the hunters anymore. They were the prey. It happened in an instant. A blur of motion cut through the white, and the snow at Naruto's feet exploded as something lunged from the shadows. Naruto's instincts kicked in. He twisted his body, stepping between Natasha and the attacker just as the figure landed hard on the snow-dusted ground. X-23. Her wild black hair whipped in the cold wind, eyes sharp and untrusting, feral, not a word needed. She moved like an animal, low to the ground, shoulders squared like a cornered predator, fingers twitching ever so slightly at her sides. Naruto raised his hands, fingers loose, posture open but guarded. I've got her, he said calmly over his shoulder. When I get an opening, take the shot. Natasha didn't argue. Her hand rested on the grip of her sidearm, gaze flicking between them, waiting for that perfect moment. X-23 didn't wait. She shot forward, wild and fast, claws not yet extended, fists aiming for Naruto's face with brutal, precise strikes. Naruto moved with her. Dodging the first blow, blocking the second with his forearm. The force behind it rattled through his bones. She moved like a wild animal, but her strikes were trained, efficient, lethal. He ducked beneath the next hook, sliding his foot across the snow-packed ground and sweeping at her legs. She leapt over him, landing cat-like, instantly twisting and slashing at his back. Naruto spun, catching her wrist and yanking her forward, but the moment he tried to lock her in place, her head snapped forward, a headbutt cracked against his chin. His grip faltered for just a second. It was enough. There was a soft metallic snick, barely a whisper against the cold air. Her fist came forward. But this time, two glinting claws shot from her knuckles, slicing through his outstretched arm, cleaving clean through muscle and bone. Naruto didn't feel the pain at first. His brain registered the sound of tearing fabric, the weight of his own limb separating before his body did. His severed arm hit the snow with a dull, wet thud, steam rising from the wound as his healing factor struggled to catch up. His gaze flicked to her claws, sharp, unyielding, glinting in the pale winter light. Adamantium. A metal sharp enough to slice through him like he was paper. His expression sharpened, less surprised, more calculating now. His body was already knitting the limb back together. Muscle strands weaving in slow motion as chakra flooded the wound, but his focus wasn't on the pain. He met her wild stare. "She wasn't kidding about you being feral," he muttered under his breath. "And here I thought this would be easy." The last tendrils of chakra wove the final threads of muscle and skin together, and Naruto flexed his newly regenerated fingers, rolling his shoulder once as if the wound had been nothing more than a scratch. His golden hair shifted with the cold wind, breath steady, eyes locked back onto X-23. She was already moving again, no pause, no mercy, but this time Naruto was ready. He darted forward, closing the gap between them in the blink of an eye. His foot planted, weight shifting, and he twisted his body beneath her next strike, dodging the deadly swipe of her adamantium claws by mere inches. Her follow-up was fierce, a wild combination of slashes and kicks, each one meant to kill, but Naruto flowed through the chaos like water. Each time her claws came close, he adjusted, parried, countered. He wasn't trying to hurt her, only subdue her. And then the opening came. A sharp sidestep, his arm wrapping around her neck from behind, locking her in a chokehold. His other hand hooked under one of her arms, locking her body in place, stopping the claws from finding his flesh again. "Gotcha," he muttered, breath warm against the cold. Her body thrashed, wild strength trying to tear free, but Naruto's grip held firm. His eyes flicked up toward Natasha, who stood just a few meters away, her sidearm already raised, aimed, perfectly still. But she wasn't pulling the trigger. The second stretched, the hesitation was clear. Naruto felt it, even if his eyes never left X-23. "Nat," he called out, voice sharp but not angry. "Now." Her finger hovered over the trigger. Her posture didn't waver, but her expression, usually locked and unreadable, had the faintest crack in it. The cold, calculating assassin, pausing. And in that heartbeat of delay, X-23 made her move. She shifted her weight, feet kicking off the snow, throwing both of them backward. Naruto's grip faltered just enough for her to twist free, flipping off his chest and landing low and ready, claws gleaming under the gray sky. Naruto recovered fast, falling into a loose stance again, but his eyes weren't on X-23 this time. They flicked to Natasha. The woman was lowering her gun, jaw tight, breath controlled, but her hesitation had already spoken volumes. X-23 vanished into the tree-line, leaving the two standing in silence, only the slow fall of snow filling the air between them. Naruto exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. "She'll circle back," he said softly, more to himself than to Natasha. But his voice carried a weight, one not entirely focused on the mission. Naruto stood still for a moment, eyes lingering on the spot where X-23 had disappeared into the trees, before his gaze drifted back to Natasha. She was already holstering her gun, face locked back into that cold, practiced calm, but Naruto wasn't buying it. "What happened?" he asked quietly, voice low but clear. There was no accusation in his tone, only certainty. He already knew something had. Natasha's gloved hands adjusted the strap on her holster with mechanical ease, her eyes not meeting his. She moved fast, I missed the timing. Naruto tilted his head, watching her carefully. You don't miss. A small twitch at the corner of her mouth, barely noticeable, but enough. Natasha let the silence stretch a little longer before speaking, voice sharp but controlled. We'll get her the next time, you said it yourself, she'll circle back. Naruto didn't push it, though it was written clear in his expression that he could. But instead, he let out a breath and nodded slightly, stepping away to scan the surrounding forest. I'm going to scatter a few clones around the perimeter, he said, already forming a hand seal. That way, even if she tries to bolt, I'll know before she gets too far. Out of the corner of his eye, he could still feel Natasha watching him, her usual iron mask back in place, but something about it wasn't the same. The sharp edges of her coldness felt softer. Not weakness, not even doubt. Something else. Naruto didn't mention it. Not yet. With a quiet poof, 3 shadow clones appeared around him and immediately flickered away, vanishing into the forest. When the silence settled between them again, Naruto stood there a moment longer, hands resting loosely in his pockets as he glanced once more at Natasha. Something's shifted, he thought to himself. He didn't press. He just gave her that same easy, knowing smile. The one that told her he'd noticed, even if he wasn't going to call her out on it. Let's wait, he said, turning toward the snow-covered clearing. She'll show again. The hours stretched on, each attempt to corner X-23 ending the same way, a flash of movement, a hint of her scent on the wind, and nothing but claw marks in the snow where she'd once stood. Time and again, Naruto and Natasha adjusted their approach, trying to predict her next move, but the feral girl was always one step ahead, using the terrain and her instincts to slip away. By the time the pale sky dimmed into a cold, muted dusk, a shade not so different from the day, they'd been forced to settle, setting up a small camp at the base of a frozen ridge. The cold was biting, the fire was small, and the silence between them hung heavier than the snow-laden air. X-23 was still out there. Watching, waiting. The forest around them had fallen into a heavy, almost suffocating quiet. Even the wind barely stirred the thin frost collecting on the dead branches overhead. The muted gray sky blended with the pale earth, making it hard to tell where the horizon even began. The crackle of the campfire was the only real sound between them, soft and steady, a lonely rhythm in the stillness. Naruto sat close to the flames, hands resting lazily over his knees, gaze unfocused on the flickering light as his thoughts drifted. You had a shot, didn't you? His voice wasn't sharp or accusing, just simple, matter of fact, but heavy enough to break through the stillness. Natasha didn't answer. She remained where she sat, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight, body still, her face unreadable as always. The silence stretched again, pressing between them, and Naruto let it, leaning his head back slightly to stare at the blank sky overhead. The fire popped, sending a brief spark of light into the cold air, but Natasha still said nothing. Naruto kept his gaze on her, his eyes calm but searching, waiting for the mask to crack. Natasha had spent most of her life building walls, but even the strongest walls had weak points, and tonight, in this quiet stretch of wilderness, there was no mission left to distract her. You hesitated for a reason, Natasha. The words drifted out, light but steady, slipping into the silence between them like a stone into still water. For a while, Natasha didn't respond. The fire crackled softly, the air cold and unmoving, and the distant trees stood in absolute stillness. The night seemed to stretch on, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Naruto leaned his head back slightly, letting the silence grow, giving her space, but his mind couldn't help wandering. He'd seen plenty of hardened people before, soldiers, survivors, fighters, people who carried their past like a second skin. But there was something different about Natasha tonight. Something more personal than any mission. Something older than her usual sharp edges. And then, finally, her voice cut through the quiet. I know her. Her tone was low and even, but there was an unmistakable weight behind the words, as if speaking them out loud stirred something she'd tried hard to bury. Naruto's head tilted slightly, his attention sharpening, but he stayed quiet. Long before she was X-23, long before she was labeled a mutant or an experiment. Natasha's eyes flicked toward the fire but didn't seem to really see it, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely, lost in years long gone. She lived with me, in the Red Room. Her voice stayed level, but slower now, as if the words grew heavier the further she went. I know you don't know what that is. But think of it as a school for girls to become killers when they grow up. We were trained together, slept in the same bunk, ate the same rationed food, survived the same tests. There was a quiet shift in her face, the smallest flicker of pain beneath her cold composure, and Naruto knew without asking that the word tests carried more meaning than she'd ever let on. She wasn't a number back then, she had a name. Natasha's lips pressed into a thin line, almost like she was forcing herself to say it. Laura. Naruto remained still, letting her finish, knowing full well that if he interrupted, even out of kindness, she'd shut herself off again. She was practically my sister. The only thing close to family I had in that place. A long pause followed, and the flames popped softly, shadows flickering against their faces. Natasha's hands had gone still in her lap, her fingers locked together, the only outward sign that her walls were starting to crack. But I wasn't enough to protect her, the words came softer now. She was pulled out of the program before I ever had a chance. Sold off to another project, the Weapon X experiment. They turned her into a living weapon, a clone, a project, a file number, not a person. She paused, and Naruto saw the faintest twitch in her jaw as she exhaled, steadying herself. I told myself for years she was dead. Or, that the person I knew was. Another quiet moment passed, and Naruto's gaze softened, though his mind was far from still. He leaned back slightly, his arms resting on his knees, feeling the weight of her words settle deep. The quiet stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty, it was full of things left unsaid. All the pieces fit now. The hesitation in the fight. The way Natasha looked at the reports on X-23. The way her voice wrapped around the name Laura like it was something fragile, something still bleeding. Naruto let his gaze drift away from her, looking out past the dark tree line as his own thoughts started turning. The night, once so cold and quiet, suddenly felt heavier than ever. Naruto's mind wandered, searching for the right thing to say, but even for him, the words didn't come easy. His gaze drifted out toward the dark tree line, his hands loosely resting against his knees. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was soft, steady, almost reflective. You know, he began, back when I started putting that island together. It wasn't just me. Natasha turned her head slightly, her eyes still shadowed, but listening. There were others. 2 of them are on the list we've been chasing. Some aren't. He paused, the faintest smile flickering at the corner of his mouth, more bittersweet than proud. It was their idea as much as it was mine. I might have shaped the land. But it was them that made it feel like home. His thoughts drifted for a moment, back to the beginnings, back to standing alone on the water, staring at the empty ocean, the wind cutting through the silence as he shaped the earth itself into a sanctuary. It wasn't easy. Not just the building part, either. There were people who wanted to stake their claim before we even finished. Mutants who wanted the place for power, humans who wanted to wipe it off the map. I lost count of how many nights we spent defending it before it ever became what it is now. His gaze dropped slightly, watching a dying ember snap and crack, soft light dancing across his face. That's why Storm didn't want to come with us at first. I think part of her still believes the world doesn't offer places like that without asking for something in return, and I don't blame her for it. At that, Natasha's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A softness, a crack in the usual steel that lined her eyes. She didn't look away, but for once, she didn't wear that cold mask either. Naruto's voice stayed calm, but there was a quiet weight behind it now. I've done a lot to get here, I've lost a lot too, and honestly, if I had the choice to start over, I wouldn't take it. His fingers drummed lightly against his leg as his smile returned, not forced, just honest. Because if I changed any of it, even the worst days, I wouldn't have the family I have now. Storm not trusting me, Darwin hiding, it's all part of the same path. It was worth it, every step. His gaze finally lifted, landing on her, steady but kind. And now you've got the same chance I did, back when all I had was a list and a stupid dream. You can get your family back, Natasha. The quiet stretched again, but the tension had shifted. Natasha's eyes lingered on him, her sharpness dulling under the weight of the truth, and for the first time all night, she didn't look like she was ready to run from it. A soft breath left her lips, not a sigh, more like something unspoken releasing. You always talk like it's that simple, she murmured, her voice quieter, less guarded. Naruto's grin curved slightly, warm but knowing. Simple, no, he leaned back, glancing up at the sky beyond the treetops. But it's possible. Natasha didn't answer, not directly. But the way her posture shifted, the way her hands relaxed, her gaze lowering to the dying fire, it was the closest thing to agreement she'd offered all night. And for now, that was enough. The sun barely crept over the horizon, though the pale gray of morning looked almost identical to the dull light of the night before. The cold air bit at the back of Naruto's neck as the last of the quiet settled between him and Natasha. It wasn't long before movement stirred in the snow-covered tree-line. Both of them were already standing, sharp eyes scanning, bodies tense. And just like the last few times, X-23 found them first. A blur of motion, silent, brutal, and precise, tore from the brush. Naruto was already moving, the frost beneath his boots cracking as he closed the gap before she could get a clean strike. This time, he didn't hold back the way he had before. His strikes were faster, sharper, each one calculating the limits of her healing, her speed, and the glint of those two steel claws. He sidestepped her first wild slice, landing a solid hit into her ribs, forcing her back, but she didn't stagger long. X-23 lunged again, swiping with one arm while spinning into a low kick. Naruto blocked, skidding through the snow, his arm vibrating slightly from the force. Still as strong as ever, he thought, eyes flicking to her claws the moment they caught the light. The fight circled, Naruto gradually pushing her into a more open space. He didn't want to hurt her, but he needed her pinned, and Natasha was already moving into position. From his blind side, he caught her silhouette lining up the shot. He tightened his hold on X-23, forcing her into the open. But for a second, nothing happened, no shot. His focus almost wavered. Finally, a sharp, single shot cracked through the air. The bullet struck true, piercing the chip behind her ear with surgical precision. X-23's body went limp in his arms, her limbs folding as her healing factor kicked in, slowing her fall. Naruto lowered her gently to the ground. But even as the silence returned, he stayed tense. A few seconds passed, her fingers twitched. Her breathing deepened. And just as fast as she'd gone down, her eyes snapped open. Muscles tensed, and she pulled herself back to her feet, staggering but alive. Her gaze wasn't wild this time, but sharp and cautious, scanning both of them like a cornered wolf uncertain whether it still needed to fight. Naruto straightened, hands open in a non-threatening gesture. While his eyes flicked to Natasha for a second. he didn't need to ask. He'd felt it in the moment, clear as day. She'd hesitated. But the conversation would have to wait. X-23 was still standing, and this time, she wasn't attacking, not yet. X-23's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, her hands twitching slightly as her senses slowly pieced themselves back together. The sharpness in her eyes was dulled for once, more lost than lethal, as if she'd just woken from a nightmare she couldn't quite shake. Her gaze flicked around the snow-dusted clearing, first locking onto Naruto. Her muscles tensed out of instinct, still coiled and ready for a fight if it came to it. But then her eyes shifted past him, to the red-haired woman standing a few feet away. For a long moment, she stared at Natasha. Confusion flickered behind that hardened exterior, as if her mind was struggling to connect a memory that felt too distant to be real. Silently, her lips parted, but no words came. Just a small, questioning look, almost too subtle to notice, but Natasha saw it. She felt it. And in that moment, something softened in her cold, controlled demeanor. The weight of years, of distance, of regret, settled on her shoulders. Her usually sharp expression eased, lips pulling into the faintest of bittersweet smiles. Her voice came out softer than Naruto had ever heard it. "Welcome back, Laura." The name seemed to still the air between them. X-23, Laura, blinked, the coldness in her gaze cracking ever so slightly, like a fractured wall trying not to collapse. No hug. No step forward. Not yet. But the connection was there, real and heavy, hanging in the air like a long-lost thread being pulled taut again. Naruto quietly stepped back, giving them the space. His mind turned, understanding now just how deep the history ran, and how much this wasn't just another mission. Back aboard the Quinjet, the hum of the engines was the only sound filling the space at first. Laura sat on one of the side benches, elbows resting on her knees, head lowered slightly, her expression unreadable. Stuck somewhere between guarded and quietly overwhelmed. Naruto stood off to the side, glancing between the two of them before stepping away toward one of the storage compartments. He knew this wasn't his moment to explain, not yet. So, without a word, he focused on rummaging through the supplies for a spare set of clothes, giving Natasha the room to speak. Natasha stood nearby, arms crossed at first, but her posture slowly relaxed as she studied Laura. There wasn't as much coldness in her gaze now, just an odd mix of caution and something softer, old scars stirring beneath her composed surface. "You were taken," her voice was steady, but the undertone wasn't as sharp as usual. "Twisted into something they could control." Laura's eyes shifted toward her, no response at first, just silent listening, the weight of that simple truth settling in. "You were used by the same people who pulled you out of the Red Room. Turned you into their perfect little weapon." Natasha continued, voice lower now. This time under the name, Weapon X-23. "I wasn't there to stop it." Laura's jaw tensed slightly, eyes flicking away for a second, but Natasha didn't push. "The chip in your head, that was them keeping you caged." She gestured subtly toward Laura's temple, then let her arms fall loosely to her sides. "But it's gone now, you're free." Just then Naruto walked back over. Holding out a neatly folded black shirt and a pair of simple, comfortable pants. His voice was casual, light, like trying not to add more pressure to an already heavy conversation. "Figured you might want something that isn't half torn and covered in snow." Laura looked at the clothes, then at him. Her hand reached out, slow but steady, taking them without a word. Natasha and Naruto shared a small look, unspoken understanding passing between them. It wasn't over, but this was the first step. Naruto leaned back against the side of the jet, arms folding lazily across his chest as the quiet settled again, the hum of the Quinjet a steady background to Laura's slow recovery. He let a moment pass after Natasha finished before picking up where she left off. That's not really all either, he said, voice a little softer than usual. Another group, a group of mutants called the Brotherhood, wants you DNA for a weapon they are putting together, so we had to find you before they did. He tilted his head, looking over at her. Doesn't matter if you wanted to be part of this or not, they would have taken it anyway. Laura's fingers curled slightly around the fresh clothes resting in her lap, the weight of that statement sinking in. You don't have to stay with them or anywhere near this kind of mess, Naruto added after a moment. I've got a place, an island, you'll be safe there, no one will be after you. Laura finally looked up at him. Her voice still a little dry, a little cracked from silence. You two, together? The bluntness of the question hit Naruto harder than he expected, catching him mid-thought. His blue eyes blinked once, then a crooked grin slowly tugged at his lips. Is it that obvious, he teased, confidence sliding back into his voice like second nature. Behind him, Natasha let out a soft, dry huff, more of an eye roll than a laugh, but the gesture wasn't as sharp as it once would have been. Don't encourage her, Natasha muttered, brushing past Naruto to sit again, though her expression betrayed a small flicker of something lighter beneath the surface. Laura's gaze drifted between them, her mind still piecing things together, but for the first time, there was a small shift, a faint, knowing look rather than the empty distance she'd had before. The conversation didn't rush, they spoke for a little while longer, Naruto filling in the gaps about the Brotherhood, and Natasha adding the occasional detail when needed. By the time the clouds shifted outside the jet's windows and the sun started to dip along the horizon, the sharpness between the three of them had softened into something quieter, something almost normal, at least for now. Once Laura was safely dropped off on the island, guided by a few of the others Naruto had gathered over the years. The weight hanging in the Quinjet finally seemed to lift, if only slightly. The engines were quiet now, the hatch still open to the salty air and the sun dipping low over the horizon. Naruto stood by the open ramp, arms resting on the frame, staring out across the island. Natasha lingered behind him, leaning against the wall, her usual sharpness dulled for once by something quieter. Thank you, she said, her voice lower, softer, no cold, calculated barrier like before. Just simple, genuine gratitude. Naruto glanced back over his shoulder, a slow smile forming but without his usual teasing edge. Didn't think I'd hear that from you, he said lightly, but the tone matched hers. Natasha shifted her weight, arms folding, eyes flicking briefly to the view outside before settling on him again. You didn't have to help her, you didn't have to help me. Yeah, well, Naruto shrugged, turning to face her more fully, I guess I'm just bad at the whole leaving people behind thing. A quiet stretched between them, but this time it wasn't heavy, just still. They sat together on the loading ramp for a while, the conversation moving from the mission to smaller things, the kind of normal conversation neither of them was really used to, but neither of them seemed willing to cut short. That's it for today, I hope you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and comment ideas if you can, and maybe you could share this with your friends, because you never know, they might like what ifs too, so without further ado, AllKage, out.